I don't know if you can hear me, but I don't have audio.
I can't, if anybody's talking, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can't either.
Okay, hold on just a
Oh,
second.
now I hear you.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, okay. Trustee Watanabe,
That's me.
and I am here.
Trustee Ryan is also here.
Yes,
I didn't hear
got
my
you,
name. Okay.
Trustee Ryan. And also pursuant to Government Code Section 54950 of the Brown Act, Trustee Watanabe has notified the superintendent that she has an emergency that requires her to participate in tonight's board meeting via virtual platform. May I please have the introduction of our interpreter?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Verónica Adams Navarro. Mi compañera Catherine Hartel y yo vamos a ser las intérpretes en español de esta noche. Bienvenidos a la reunión de la mesa directiva del Distrito Escolar Unificado de Santa Clara. Esta reunión está siendo transmitida en el canal en español de Zoom. Para escuchar esta sesión en español, oprima el botón que dice Interpretación en su pantalla y seleccione el lenguaje español. En este menú también puede seleccionar la opción para silenciar el audio original en inglés. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Trustee Muirhead. The mission of Santa Clara Unified School District is to provide equitable, engaging, and innovative educational experiences so that each student thrives in a global society. The vision of Santa Clara Unified is that graduates are resilient, future-ready, lifelong learners who think critically, solve problems collaboratively, and are prepared to thrive in a global society. Santa Clara Unified School District acknowledges that our schools are on the traditional lands of the Tamiyan Nation, the Aboriginal American Indian tribe of Santa Clara Valley. We pay respect and thanks to their people, both past and present. May I please get a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda, Rotterman.
Second. Trustee Canova is absent. Trustee Fairchild?
Yes.
Trustee Muirhead? Yes. Trustee Rotterman?
Yes.
Trustee Ryan?
Yes.
Trustee Watanabe?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, guidelines and policy for public comment at a board meeting. Board Policy 1313 is our civility policy. This policy is intended to promote mutual respect, civility, and orderly conduct among district employees, parents, and the public. This policy is not intended to deprive any person of his or her right to freedom of expression, but only to maintain, to the extent possible and reasonable, a safe, harassment-free workplace for our students and staff. In the interest of presenting district employees as positive role models to the children of this district, and as well as the community, SCUSD encourages positive communication and discourages volatile, hostile, or aggressive actions. The district seeks public cooperation with this endeavor. The board understands that the First Amendment provides strong protection for speech. However, the board expects that all speech and expression will comport with norms of civil behavior on district grounds, in district facilities, during district activities or events, and in the use of district electronic digital systems and platforms. Okay, we will move now to item B1, which is our open enrollment discussion. I know we have a presentation, so Ms. Meltzer.
All right. Good evening, trustees, staff, members of the public. So tonight we're here to talk about open enrollment. It's a program that we've had in our district for quite some time now. And we all know that we're a district. We offer unique opportunities, which gives our families an opportunity to have voice and choice in the educational experiences of their children. This item was placed on the agenda to ensure that we have a responsible conversation as a governing board and also as a district leadership team, because reality is the impact of open enrollment on our district operations is much different today than it has been in the past due to our shifting enrollment and demographics. Now, I've had several conversations during this school year regarding open enrollment, and there's certainly an argument that open enrollment, our choice programs, will they help our district retain students who might otherwise choose private school or that charter option. While that may be true, and that perspective is certainly important and worth examining, there's also reason for us to pause and take a closer look at the impacts of the broader system. Over the past several years, we've had ongoing conversations about these shifting enrollment patterns to our neighborhood schools. As overall enrollment continues to decline, open enrollment can also sometimes contribute to additional movement of students away from our neighborhood schools, in some cases creating very small schools, increased need for combination classes, and also creates challenges for us sustaining robust programs at our school sites. To research this as a district, we've established a boundary committee to study and make recommendations regarding the enrollment shifts, which could be rebounding or school consolidation. But until we determine if revisions to our open enrollment policies and practices are needed, our boundary committee remains at a standstill. In addition to the enrollment shifts, equity and access are essential considerations in this conversation. Important questions have been raised about participation in open enrollment, including who's accessing these opportunities. I think as a district, we really need to understand the demographics of the participation, including language proficiency, ethnicity, social economic status, and whether families have equitable access to these programs. Now, this conversation is complex. We anticipate this going on through the fall of next year. So tonight, we intentionally decided to break this conversation into two separate discussions. Tonight, we're going to focus on the open enrollment policies and practices. And in our future meeting, we're aiming for sometime at the end of April, talk more along the lines of our choice programs and the impacts that they may be having on our district. I did something. There we go. So again, tonight, we're going to review Ed Code, board policy, administrative regulations to make sure that we have a shared understanding on how they shape our current practices and outcomes. We want to review our open enrollment data to make sure that we better understand the patterns and trends within our district. We want to engage our trustees in discussion about the data and what the data is telling us. And we also want to identify some additional information that we may need to research to bring back for future conversations. We also want to establish a meeting date or a timeline as this discussion continues. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joanna. Green one.
Thank you. I don't have too much more to add. Oops, excuse me. To what Dr. Wright already said, but our current context tells us that Board Policy 5116.12 about open enrollment does create some tension between our desire to provide individual family voice and choice and maintain robust neighborhood schools or schools of residence. And as Dr. Wright mentioned, our commitment to equity and access for all students, and then just the general overall operational health of the district. Over the course of the evening, we're going to ask you to think about several questions and discuss several questions when the opportunity arises. We've tried to chunk this presentation into elementary, middle, and high school because I'm sure you noticed when you looked at the slides that there are a lot of slides there. So we thought that going through slides for 30 schools without stopping to chat and sort of chunk our thinking might be challenging. So we're using some teaching best practices here, and we're going to stop along the way so that we can sort of organize our thoughts and not have to be overwhelmed with all of the data at once. So as we go through, you'll see this slide again, asking you to think about whether our board policy meets or does not meet the needs of our district and our community, given our current context, which is that voice and choice, desire for robust neighborhood schools, et cetera, and whether it upholds our commitment to equity and access for all students. In addition, we'd like you to think about what shifts may or may not need to happen to address the concerns discussed this evening, that bubble up this evening. And as Dr. Wright mentioned, what other information you may need as we continue this discussion later this spring, specifically about choice schools and choice programs. We will have this slide with these questions up for you again, so you don't have to write these down word for word right now, because you'll have access to them again. I would also just like you to know that we did make an update to the presentation. There were some data refinements made to these slides that I gave you all a copy of. There are copies on this small table if anyone in the audience would like a copy. And Mr. Shield has uploaded the revised version of this to the board agenda. So Mr. Lewis will take you through those slides after Joanna goes through open enrollment policy.
So can you hear me? So our open enrollment board policy is governed by board policy and administrative regulation 5116.12 and education code 35160.5. And so in Santa Clara Unified School District, in order to apply for open enrollment, families must be currently attending or pre-enrolled for the upcoming school year. And so to be able to submit an application for open enrollment. And in our district, open enrollment occurs right after we come back from the winter break in January, and it closes the first Friday of February. And so families who submit an application for open enrollment are entered into a random lottery that is ran by school site and by grade level. And within the lottery, there are certain individuals who get priority within the lottery, and that is siblings of students who are going to be enrolled at that school for the upcoming school year. Students who have been overloaded, which means that there was no space at their neighborhood school, so they were placed at a different school, and so they received the second priority. And then the third and fourth priority are district employees. So district employees who work at that school get a higher priority than district employees who work at other schools within the district or other departments within the district. And then everyone else who does not fall into these priorities also have a lottery within that, or within their grade level and within their school site. Families who miss the open enrollment application window may submit a late open enrollment application, and the late open enrollment application typically opens on April 1st. And that is because we close the open enrollment and send the offers, and then we do a lot of the moving of the students within our district in the month of February and March. If a family receives an offer, then they have 5 days to accept the offer. And then once they accept the offer, that school becomes their home school for the entire grade span. So if they were approved in kindergarten, they don't have to reapply for open enrollment. That is their home school through 5th grade unless they move out of our district boundaries. And then as a district, we honor parents' preference if there is sufficient capacity at that school site without displacing other currently enrolled students. Santa Clara Unified does not provide transportation for students who are approved on open enrollment. Parents have to provide the transportation for their child. And then students who are placed on the open enrollment wait list are on that wait list through January of that school year that they applied for. And they apply, and then their additional students may apply for late open enrollment up until the first day of school.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So if, say, you accepted open enrollment into 2nd grade, and partway you know, through the school year, a family moves in and they have a second grader that's their homeschool. Does that bump an open enrolled student, or does the homeschool child have to go somewhere else?
The homeschool child is displaced and has to go somewhere else. So for our choice programs, we fill up to capacity based on student to teacher ratio. So at our choice programs, at our neighborhood schools, we do leave a little bit of room for students who are going to move after the school year has started. And the month of August and the month of September, we still do receive a good number of students who apply.
So what happens when we tell a person that moves into the neighborhood that they can't go to their home school?
Those are our students who are overloaded. And so
Right.
sometimes families are okay with it. Other times families may be upset that their child is not going to their assigned school
Yeah.
because they move into the district, sometimes to go to that particular school.
It feels like a conversation should be had about open enrollment being temporary, dependent on homeschool population. I don't like having a neighborhood family being displaced because of open enrollment. So I think that might be something that we should talk about as a board at some point, at least in my opinion. But as Jim says, I'm only one of 7, so.
And then why families apply for open enrollment. And so the first reason is that they want their child to attend a school that is not their neighborhood school. They apply for open enrollment if they have a new child enrolling for Santa Clara Unified and their older sibling has been approved through the open enrollment process. If they were waitlisted the previous year and they did not get in, then they would reapply for open enrollment to be entered into the lottery for the new school year. Students in our neighborhood programs that were approved for an intra-district transfer, potentially because they moved during the school year and want to stay at their current school, would apply for open enrollment. And then district employees who are new or who their child is moving to a different grade span, so from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, they would apply for open enrollment.
Thank you. I have a question about this slide. Where did we get the data? Do we do a survey of parents?
So these are the typical these are the typical reasons why a family would apply, not necessarily the reason why they are applying.
Okay, so this is why we think they are applying.
This would be why they would have to apply, if that makes sense, not necessarily the reason why they're applying. So like they would have to apply if they wanted their child to go to a different school.
Okay, okay. Have we ever considered doing any type of survey to families of why they are doing open enrollment?
That has been a topic of conversation, but we have not.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to hand it to Mr. Lewis, who will talk about the open enrollment data.
Before you go on, I just want to be sure I'm clear of one thing. Before open enrollment takes place, neighborhood, people in their neighborhood school have first priority. Or because the last I saw, you can't displace a neighborhood student with open enrollment.
Right.
Is that correct?
So our open enrollment happens January through February. And so we have sent out open enrollment offers for the upcoming school year. And so we look at current enrollment that they have at that school site right now. So like if a school site today has like they're over enrolled or they only have like maybe 5 spaces left, then we sometimes hold off until we do our intent to return, our address verification. And so sometimes we cannot offer right away in March or April, but then maybe a lot of people move during the summer in that grade level, and then we do offer.
Not worried about open enrollment. I'm worried about the neighborhood, the schools who reside within the neighborhood school zone. They would, I'm assuming, have first priority prior to any open enrollment, other than those grandfathered people that have already been enrolled.
Correct. So we do give them priority So for our neighborhood schools that have neighborhood boundaries, school boundaries, we do look at the current enrollment. So we wouldn't fill up to capacity through the open enrollment process because we're still enrolling.
Yeah, my only concern is, I'm pretty certain that you cannot displace a neighborhood student that registers in the proper timeframe from going to that school and displace them with any form of open enrollment. However, if they reply late, that's a different story. But if they follow the rules, neighborhood school, they have to go there. And they may still get overloaded, but if so, they're not doing any open enrollment to that school either because they have priority over anybody coming in open enrollment. Is that correct?
Correct. So
Thank you. Just want to be sure I was clear. I understood it. Appreciate it.
But I'm jumping in, but once they have been accepted through open enrollment, then my understanding is that school kind of becomes their home school so that they,
correct.
in a subsequent year, they're not going to be moved out because more neighborhood students have moved in.
Correct.
Okay.
Also ask how that works for kindergarten families who, some kinder families don't realize that they should be doing this in January and they might wait until August to even show up at a school. So, so you're just keeping a few spots open for those late ones. You're not,
Correct.
you're assuming that most kinder families are going to show up by January or February, I guess.
So we do leave some space in our neighborhood schools for families that are going to move during the summer. And we look at data that we have, like our historical enrollment data, so that we don't over accept students in those particular grade levels. It is something very difficult to predict because we really don't know who's moving in and who's moving out of the district.
Trustee Fairchild.
Thank you. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was something that Dr. Waddell worked with you guys on setting a percentage. And because it was really important when we were initially talking about this comes up often, that we staff our schools tightly to their neighborhood projections. Some of our schools had gotten rather large because we had such loose staffing and we had space for kids, a lot of kids to open enroll into those schools, which for some people is good and for others may view it as a negative. And so as Dr. Waddell, I know he worked with the percentage, am I correct?
Yes.
What is the percentage at the different levels?
So usually for March and April, we're in the 80 to 85. Then when we get into May and June, it goes to about 90. And then in the summer months, once we have the intent to returns and address verification, then we typically can go up to that 95% number.
That you only accept those. So let's say your local capacity of the students, let's say it's 80% and you accept 15% more through open enrollment, you would stop at the 95 in case more kids come.
Correct. Mhm.
I know I really appreciated when Dr. Waddell kind of gave some parameters and some numbers. And I think what we've seen is with that tighter staffing is less movement or less potential for movement in some ways.
Yeah, and a little bit sometimes slower to move students. So like right now we've sent out all our offers. Our intent to return is going out March 30th. And so after the intent to return goes out, then we're always running our numbers, but then we're looking at if the intent to returns created more spaces at our schools where we could pull additional students off of the wait list.
So the space is determined a little bit by the timing.
Correct.
So I think that's very wise. Thank you.
Okie doke. So hello everyone, good evening. I will go over some data. It's very high level, holistic data. This is a complex task, and I have great respect for Ms. Gonzalez and her team because there's a lot going on in our district and movement between sites. And so what I have prepared for you this evening is as high level and comprehensive as I could come up with look at the idea of open school sites. And so many of the slides tonight, well, all of the slides have the same presentation of information. And so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the first ones to sort of orientate you to them and explain what you're looking at, and then less time moving forward. I am not going over every single school in our slide deck. I have chosen a few for different reasons that I will point out as I get to them. But within the attached presentation and in the packet, you will find all of the schools. So to begin, we are looking at our elementary schools. Now, all of the data is going to be in reference to kinder through 5th grade for our elementary schools. And the reason for that is because there was a desire not to include TK, as TK are not open enrolled except for at Scott Lane. But even at that school, the numbers do not include TK. So keep that in mind as we look at these numbers. They will be slightly smaller because TK has not been included. Okay, so to begin, this slide provides a graphic representation of the overall demographics of our students in grades TK through 5 by race and ethnicity from 2001 to our current 2025-26.
And so a comment for the benefit of those people trying to follow at home. I don't believe the slide 10 on the online is updated to the slide 10 you're using or the one that we have here. The one online still has those peak pyramids in it.
Got it. Yes. So as I was going to note,
I think the new slide deck has been uploaded to the agenda as well with a revision that says revised, and the old one is there as well. So people could compare the two and see where the changes were.
I'm not seeing that.
Ah,
And we're online live, so.
we have special help coming around to support you right now.
Yeah, I just figured if there's somebody trying to follow this online, they would be very lost and confused.
right.
Thank you.
Yes. So
Oh.
the
maybe that's
issue
my
was
problem.
with the 2015-2016 school year. So that was corrected.
Can I ask a clarifying? The very bottom line, I think it's green up there. I thought it was blue on ours. It comes off the bottom consistently throughout your slides. What is
Yes.
that line?
So that would be our Native American population.
Okay.
So to finish my comment, since I was wrong, there's 2 presentations in the board agenda. One says revised. I made the mistake of getting the old one, but others may have done that as well.
Got it.
Thank you.
My apologies for that.
Mr.
No,
Luke.
I'd rather see both. I just
Mr. Luke.
didn't understand it.
Even though the slide says TK through 5, the data is only K through 5.
Oh, excuse me. The open enrollment data that we're going to be looking at is K5. This is TK5 as far as this is our overall district.
Okay, so this
reported
is
through
TK5.
Calped. Yes, this is TK.
Okay.
But you can see the changes right in our overall demographics of our student groups, and then our decline in over the last few years, right, in our enrollment for elementary. Okay, and so now this graph shows student groups. And so these are percentages, whereas the other one were counts. So those were individual counts of students. These are percentages because some of these students can duplicate in the student groups here. So you have economically disadvantaged in the purple, EL, ML, or multilingual learners in the blue, or the darker blue, and then the middle one are students with IEPs, and the last one there are students on 504 plans. And so again, because a student can be economically disadvantaged, English learner, and have an IEP, this is not by count, it's by percentage of our overall district. So you can see for our elementary programs, we have been increasing our percentage of students with IEPs while reducing our economically disadvantaged and our English learner population, which are those unduplicated pupils. So we've seen data that we've discussed as a district about the reduction in our unduplicated pupils. And so this sort of shows that to you, but in just the elementary grade levels. Other slides will have middle school and high school. Okay, so so for these next slides, we're talking just K-5 for elementary. So this is a table that provides you with just one quick glimpse of all of the information that I'm going to be, well, the majority of the information I'm going to be going over as far as the change between the School of Residence and the current enrollment at our school sites. So as Ms. Gonzalez said, once a student is enrolled at one of these other schools, that's not necessarily their school of residence, it becomes their home school. But for the purposes of this analysis, it's looking solely at, so their grid code is a permanent code. They're permanently coded to that particular school of residence. And so what we can see is what would the composition of the school look like had every student who is sort of zoned to that particular school remained at that school versus what is their current enrollment. And so again, you'll notice that I am skipping past some of our schools just so that you know they have been organized by proximity to one another to make it a little bit easier to sort of think about, well, where are kids going in that particular neighborhood. But here is an example of one of our elementary schools. So this is Montague. Again, it's one of our smaller schools, and so we thought we would focus on it. To the left, you see what it's called a Sankey chart, and essentially what it is it says, okay, well, here is the enrollment for the School of Residence, and so you can see for Montague, it's 238, and then the graph then breaks off into, well, where are those students now? So there's their School of Residence, and I'm terming it new school. So where are they in their new school? And so you can see that it's ordered from lowest to highest. And so the largest percent of the students who are not at their school of residence are going to Don Calajon. Here you can see that there's a little calculation in the center there. So it's the school of residence started at 238. The open enrollment loss is what I'm calling it is 95. Now I do want to be careful here and say that those other permutations that Ms. Gonzalez mentioned about employees, children going to schools or through the overflow, IEP placements, things like that are also sort of lumped in here as well with that number. Those were not high percentages though in the overall information and data, but it is something to note. And I'll point out one other example of how you can sort of see that in the data as we move on. But once you have the open enrollment loss, or basically the loss of students who are not at their school of residence, then you have kids coming in, right, through the open enrollment process or through other placement. And so you can see that Montague got 60 kids, that 60 students, excuse me, in their current composition of Montague right now came in from a different school of residence. And so their current enrollment is 203. And so that represents an overall net sort of enrollment loss of 35. The charts to the tables, excuse me, to the right show the demographics of those open enrollment loss demographics. So of the students who are not at their school of residence, what percentages were they comprised of? That is the top one. And so you can see in this example that 42 of those students, or 44.2% of them, identify as Asian. And then you can look down and see that 13 of those students have an IEP, or 13.7% of those who moved during the lost demographics. And then the table on the bottom there references the open enrollment gains. So the kids coming in to the school, what were those demographics and percentages? So again, you can see that 25 of them identified as Hispanic Latino, or 41.7% of those coming into Montague. And then just another example for you there, economically disadvantaged, 26.7%, or 16 of those kids. This next slide shows you a comparison between their school of residence demographics. So again, what would the composition of the school look like if every student who was zoned to that school went there versus what does their current enrollment demographics look like now? So again, you can see that the end size between the school of residence demographics, I'm just looking at the top row there, for their Hispanic Latino population was 81 students. They currently have 84 students enrolled identifying as Hispanic Latino, but the percentages changed because your overall, right, numbers and compositions change. And so, yes, this information would be telling you that Montague is a slightly more Hispanic Latino population than it would have otherwise been. Now, I also want to point out that I'm not trying to make a determination whether this is good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. It is the current structures. You can also see, oh, go ahead. Mhm.
The kids that, I apologize, I'll make one other question. You indicated earlier that the kids that were overloaded from another school are part of the gain number that's present.
For-
And
For some schools, yes.
so the reason I'm asking the question is, do we have anywhere data that shows the number of people that voluntarily chose to go to the school versus those that were displaced elsewhere and were not forced, but mostly forced to go to that school?
We would be able to pull that data from Aries because our students who are overloaded are coded with a tag that is an overload tag. So that is data that we could pull. This year, we have far less overloads than in the previous enrollment presentations that we had, especially north of the 101. So we are seeing far less overloads from Agnew than when it recently opened a couple of years ago. But that is data we can pull for you.
My concern, since we're looking at demographics,
Mhm.
to see if there's if there's a demographic that's being moved, if there's equity within the movement of the demographics. So is there one demographic that's been moved to a school that, none of our schools are less desirable, but there are people in the public that think that. So I'm just curious if that was a factor, and you don't probably have that data right now, so.
If you, I do, I would just check so a part of this is the cleanliness of our data, right? And how things are coded in Aries. I'm pretty sure this is, so I'm going to say a number, but I'm going to look to Johanna to tell me, because if she says, no, that doesn't sound right, then I'm going to go with it. There are 20 kids in my data set that have a code of being overloaded throughout all of elementary.
So it's a minor consideration. Thank you.
So the 60 open enrollment gain at Montague, those are families that were overloaded or they chose to go to Montague instead of their home school.
No, so Montague has 0 students in my data set that have an overload. There were, so in that data, it does not show, there are no overloads in Montague.
So the plus 60 open enrollment gain are families that chose to go to Montague in open enrollment.
And 17 of those are students who were placed there on a special education placement based on their IEP services. So they're in the mild, moderate, mild, severe program at that school.
Okay, so the delta then of those 17 are open enrollment by choice.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to understand that it's not people that got overloaded and then if the spot opens up at their home school, they're gonna go to their home school. Okay, thank you.
The key number there was system-wide, there's only 22 overloaded, so it's not a significant factor either.
I'm curious what you just said about special ed students. Just like there's only about 20 overloaded students, do you have an idea of how many of all of the, because I'm amazed that there's so much movement in and out. So do you have an idea of about how many of all of this movement is due to special ed placement?
230
Wow. Okay.
at the elementary.
That's
K-5.
significant.
Yes. Oh, excuse me, 218. I misspoke. Okay. Oh, no. Thank you for the clarifying questions. And so here is Don Calajon. And so, again, in addition to, right, seeing that, that large width of that Sankey chart going to Down Calajan, right, we're looking at Down Calajan now. And so we can see that using the same sort of methodology, right, 59 students are not at Down Calajan, even though it is their school of residence, but they are picking up 165 students from other schools, and so that is giving them a net enrollment gain. Whereas the other school sites are
Trustee
having a
French.
loss.
So in looking at that, this is K5, all K5 students. And I'm a little perplexed, and I don't know if you can explain this, because if we're staffing tightly, how have we had room for 165 students to enter the school with the school of residence count? The reason I ask, and I'm trying to, I value parent choice, but we can create a problem if we overstaff and there's room for the students to move. And then what we see, if there's a big displacement, if their school of residence count is 256, shouldn't it be staffed to 256? That's just my question, just because we have, then we're staffing for 100 more students. Okay.
So when doing the staffing projections, we use a wide variety of factors, including more than 14 years worth of data on a school by school basis, and as well as a grade level by grade level basis, looking at the matriculation of students in grade level cohorts as they move throughout the system. As we all know, students don't come in nice, neat, even buckets. And so we're able to look at the number of students who typically move from throughout a school. So in the case of Down Calajan at the elementary, we can track what history shows in regards to as a student comes in through kindergarten, what's the change as they move from kindergarten to first grade to second grade to third grade, so on and so forth. That analysis is done and we staff at that point in time. After we do the staffing allocations, the next step is the open enrollment transfer policy. So as students move out, that gives the ability for some students to transfer into the school. But again, it comes down to that nice, neat, even bucket. And so while you may have, for example, let's say hypothetically you had 50 second graders, based upon our current staffing allocation, let's say you had 55. If you were projecting 55, that wouldn't be 2 teachers, that would be 3 teachers. Because you can't do, at our current staffing allocation of 24-1, you won't be able to do that with 2, so you would allocate 3 teachers. Now that means that at that second grade cohort, you have the ability for a total of 72 students as opposed to the 55. So then that creates that ability to transfer students into Down Calajan based upon those additional requests. So it's all as the result of a lot of different factors, including they just don't come in neat little bundles.
I appreciate the explanation. I'm just a little stunned by the number because it's quite significant. And correct me if I'm wrong, most of our open enrollments happen in kindergarten. Is that correct? And then it seems like they drop significantly. It's not like we're having the same number requested for K through 5. What's like the percentage?
Oh, I don't have the percentage, but yes, you're correct. Kindergarten, 6th grade, and 9th grade are our highest number of open enrollment applications district-wide. Like there is a significant drop for 1st grade through 5th grade.
And I do just want to quickly clarify that these are cumulative counts. And so these are not the total so there weren't, 106 kids who came in the 25-26 year. This is the 25-26 enrollment composition. And
Yeah,
so it's
K,
total.
it's K through 5.
Yes.
Thank you. You guys, you've been very clear. I really appreciate that.
But that 165 is just in that 1 year.
No.
But you said, sorry, can I have a mic?
No, you can't.
So now I'm confused because you said once they open enroll, now it's their homeschool. So the next year, they're not considered an open enrollment student again, are they?
No, so this, again, so to provide a comprehensive picture of what's happening at the homeschool or the school of residence, it's using their original code of residence. And so basically it already encompasses that student, although they are at their home school now and they can think of that because they don't have to reapply and you just come back next year. That's how it happens when the rubber hits the road. But for this particular analysis, it's counting every single one of those kids as not having been.
So even though most of them happen in kindergarten, this is including K-5 kids. Like you'll have a whole bunch of fifth graders included in this count.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, correct.
I think, if I might piggyback on that, but to my point, it's essentially a class at every grade at this school. Do the math, open enrollment gain, divide by 6. Yeah.
Good. If I can add one other piece, in the case of Don Calajon, we have seen an increase in open enrollment gains as the result of the change for becoming an arts and design school. And so even this year, for the first time in a long time, we actually saw a growth in second grade, third grade, and fourth grade as opposed to historical trend on this campus. So that is also a data set that is unique to Don Calajon that we had not seen at Don Calajon in prior years.
And then this slide also, I think, provides a little bit more information about the changing in demographics, right, from the school of residence to their current enrollment. So, one particular group to maybe zero in on are our students with IEPs. So the school of residence demographics, there are 29 students, but their current enrollment it's 49 students with IEPs. There are also other differences. So the economically disadvantaged percentage went up from 18% to 22.9. And then I won't call out any of the others, but it is changes. Okay. Oh, whoops. Sorry. Ponderosa. And so Ponderosa was included as an example of a school that does have students moving through open enrollment. And they also receive students in pretty equal numbers there. So this is an example of a school that's not necessarily as impacted as some of the other schools in our system. So really just included this. I mean, obviously I included every school, but really the point of talking about it tonight is to show that there is variance, right, amongst our schools, and some are definitely impacted more than others. I won't belabor that anymore. Westwood is an example of a school that is heavily impacted. You can see the net enrollment loss there. So they gained 44, but lost 206. And then the demographics of those students who are going to other schools are to the right, and then those that they're gaining to the left. With Westwood in particular, I think it's interesting to look at their students with IEPs. So they're resident, the zone to them, 67 students have IEPs, and they have 31 in their school now. So the drop from what would have been 14.6 to 10.5. There were also increases to the economically disadvantaged percentages and other student groups.
Does anyone have an idea of why so many are going to Washington Open? I know there's a hypothesis is because it feels like a neighborhood school, so they would rather go to the closer school, even if it's parent participation. Anybody have any insight on that?
I think we do agree that if you look at the boundary maps that were attached to the agenda as well, the many of the students who are zoned for Westwood live closer to Washington Open, so that is definitely part of it. Do you want to add anything to that, Joanna?
I would also say they do a great job of retaining their students and their families. And so they get good siblings that come through where they've been able to, like they have a younger child and an older child. So we do see a good number of sibling enrollment, but also the proximity.
And the
to
reason I asked
school.
the question is that that proximity issue has been around for a long time. And I have not seen it. I haven't had this clean of data, thank you, Cameron. But I haven't seen that, at least anecdotally, for until more recently. And I wondered if there was something that was causing that change. Anyway, I think the answer is no, we don't. That's something to be discovered. Thank you.
Yes, I'm thinking of this as a flashlight for myself personally about where might we want to dig down deeper. And then Sutter is an example of another school that has not as impacted, but even with a good number of kids going to Milliken.
And I would imagine for many of those kids, Milliken is closer to them than Sutter. If they're, where the neighborhood boundaries are. I imagine it has the same issue.
Correct.
Okay. Briarwood, another example of a school that was more heavily impacted, and this one also shows Milliken as a large draw. Okie doke, and then their demographic change as well.
Does the school have any special ed classrooms?
They did, but some of them are moved right now to Briarwood due to the construction.
No,
The Bowers, sorry.
Oh.
The Briarwood were moved to Bowers because of the construction. So
does
they
this
do.
include those students?
It does not include them because they're not there this school year. They're at Bowers.
See, because we have special ed classrooms that we move kids to. That seems like that would be part of this puzzle, is where to place those classrooms that we know are going to have enrollment in them, so that they're convenient for the families, but you could make use of a school that doesn't have as many students, perhaps.
Well, you can, oh, sorry.
Can I just add to that? So that's one of the schools in my trustee area. I'm there often. Why they were displaced this year is because they are having construction.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and so, but the classrooms that are on that site are actually designed to be quite small, a bit smaller than some of our other classrooms, due to the nature of the disability. So it wouldn't be a significant number of students.
I wasn't talking about Briarwood specifically.
Yeah, but
I was the special ed movement of, bringing kids together when there might only be one or two at a school. And so you bring from other schools together. That's how we do our special ed. And I'm not saying anything against that, but it does factor into the whole open enrollment discussion, is realizing that we do that. And that's part of the movement.
Yeah, and Briarwood has had that strand since I was hired in 2000. And so it was kind of sad to see it go away just temporarily, but it'll be back. So,
So the thing I noticed the most in here is the fact that you had a huge decrease in Asian population. On a comparative basis, most of the rest of the percentages stayed the same. Asian went down, which caused the others to go up, primarily Hispanic. Do we have any clue as to why that would have happened?
I do not have that data.
Okay, sorry. I know you said at the beginning you didn't have that, but I still got to ask.
Yes, no, I would love to.
But it will be interesting to know if it's like the Asian students from Briarwood are the ones going to Milliken, or is it, which students is it that are going to each of these schools? Agreed. Yeah.
Well, so not in this presentation tonight. I did pull data on our choice schools, and so we do have insight into, and sort of in the same way that we can see the loss and the gain. It would be the gain percentages from the schools, and so that's not tonight, but that is something that we're planning to look at when we look at our choice schools. And then the one thing that I would point out about Briarwood is that the School of Residence, there were 47 students with an IEP, and right now, their current enrollment, there are 18 students with an IEP. So, and because I pulled it via what is their current school, if those students are at Bowers even temporarily, they would, they're probably a part of that drop that we're seeing there.
I just did the math quickly. It's a pretty significant part of that drop. I mean, approximately 24 students in the 3 classrooms, I would say. Or was it 2 classrooms? 2 or 3 times 8, 24 students? I shouldn't do math out loud on a board meeting that's being taped, but.
It's actually a rule. Don't do math live.
Well, and the reason I've asked some of the questions, it isn't something I think the board would actually directly address unless there's something failing in the system. But as we see these changes, if we can get to the cause for the change, we can see if there's something that needs to be changed at that school or in the system to balance it, make it more equitable, particularly if there's something that's happening that is deferential to one of the groups versus another group. So that's why the query, why the question's being asked. I think that's the thing that'll probably happen behind the scenes without our direct intervention. That would be my hope anyway. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, and then the last elementary school that we're going to discuss today is Scott Lane. And so I guess preview that when we talk about the choice schools, they will be in green just sort of to distinguish them from the School of Residence, which are in blue. However, I am giving you a preview of one of those in relation to Scott Lane because of, well, first off, because Ms. Gonzalez said I should, but on top of that, it was because the data supported exactly what she was seeing. And so this is an example of, yes, on the left, the students who are at Scott Lane as their School of Residence and what other schools that they are going to, right? So you see 19 are going to Washington Open, another 19 are going to Bowers, 15 to Westwood, so on and so forth. The Sankey chart to the right, the green one, shows where kids are coming in to Scott Lane. And so you'll see there that their biggest contributor is Scott Lane School of Residence. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and why I decided to make that graphic. So here is Scott Lane's School of Resident count. It's 401. Their open enrollment, so kids moving elsewhere, 139. And then their open enrollment gain is 112. So where are those kids coming from, or why are they joining Scott Lane? Their current enrollment is at 374, which has a net enrollment loss of negative 27, which, given how we've been discussing our school sites, would say, well, that's not as impactful as some of our other schools. However, when you take into account the Choice School DLI program, it was actually 107 of those 112 kids came in to be a part of the DLI program, which changes the homeschool's open enrollment gain to +5. Additionally, the intra-school loss to their DLI program is 230 students, which makes Scott Lane's enrollment, actually a non-DLI students 144. Excuse me. And so their net enrollment loss minus DLI would be 257. And so when I saw this, I said, well, I hope you forgive me having a little fun there with the graphic about a tale of two schools, but you essentially have a dual immersion school when 230 of your students are in that program, was my perspective. So I did want you to see that, just how that fleshed out.
230 out of 374.
Correct. Okay, and then here are the demographics for Scott Lane's DLI program and their neighborhood school, so to speak, school of residence. Additionally, at the request of Mr. Shield, I did include something that's not on the other slides, and that is a distinction between their English learner, multilingual learner population, and their English only students. Which is at the bottom, sorry.
Trustee Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Can you go back one slide? I'm still processing the slide before. So if we look at Scott Lane, not DLI, the total number of students K through 5 is 144.
Correct.
And knowing that they don't come in nice, neat little boxes, which we talk about, that seems like a very difficult staffing issue. Mr. Shield is nodding his head.
Most of the grade levels in the neighborhood program have one teacher per grade level, and some of them there's combos. So either they have one class per grade level, or there is a combination.
And I do want to acknowledge the stress that causes our teachers as well, because they see the numbers decreasing on an annual basis. And I know that the teachers in that part of the program, worry on an annual basis whether they'll be able to stay or whether they'll have a combo class next year, which is likely given the numbers. So it is a staffing conundrum.
And if I can speak a little bit more even about that, when looking at the projections for Scott Lane for next year, there would be 2 grade levels that would have 15 students or less, and 2 that would have 22 or less, not counting kindergarten. In fact, the projection next year shows that the decline would be that instead of 144, the projection for Scott Lane for the non-DLI program next year would be about 120.
I'm just curious if you had prior to DLI, Scott Lane had the highest percentage of Hispanic and non-English speaking students in the district. I'm curious if that demographic over time has changed. I know I can't tell from the DLI program, et cetera, but do we know if the homeschool population still has that kind of demographics, or has that changed over time?
I do not have that answer in front of me.
I suspect it's probably similar.
Andy, could you turn on your mic?
Sorry, I almost got to it. Yeah, because it used to be, my first impression when I came here is that it would be George Main that had that percentage. And I was surprised to find it was Scott Lane, and that held for the longest time. I don't know if it's still the case. And then there was a debate about whether to put the DLI program at that facility or a different facility. With an ideal DLI program, you don't just use students with the second language. Makes, anyway, I don't think we're gonna get far with this, I'll stop.
Actually, I just remembered I do have that information.
Means I must keep talking.
Just jog my memory. So Scott Lane, for their Hispanic Latino population, in 2000, 2001, it was 49%. In 2005, 2008, it went up to 68.6%. And so these are not in sequential, they're jumping by 5 years or so. And then in 2010, 2011, it went to 75%. And then it stayed pretty constant, 73.3% by the time we got to 2015, 16, and then 71%, 2020, 21, and now it's sitting at 80%. And that includes DLI. It's the entire composition of the school. Okay.
Thank you. So we're going to take a break from data. And while we're taking that break, I do want to take a moment to thank Mr. Lewis and Ms. Gonzalez and Dr. Carrillo for all the work that they put into collecting this data and making it look, making it digestible for the typical person who can't interact with a very complex spreadsheet like they can. They are masters of spreadsheets and masters of their numbers. So thank you very much for all of your hard work. It's been a heavy lift and we appreciate everything you've done. So with that, now's your time to discuss this a little bit more and to ask additional questions if you have them, although you have been asking them. So if we could go to the next slide, Cameron, if you don't mind, just because you have it there. We would love for you to start the discussion about whether this policy around open enrollment enables us to meet the needs of our district or not meet the needs of our district given our current context, whether it upholds the commitment to equity and access for all students, and if you think any shifts, if we need to start thinking about any potential shifts. And then you have been giving us some input about other data that you might need when we discuss this the next time regarding choice schools and programs, which I've been taking notes on. But if there's other stuff that's been bubbling up for you, we'd love to hear about that as well.
Trustee Fairchild.
Thank you, President Learman. One of the things that I feel is missing from the data set is the how many families apply for open enrollment by demographic. And I believe we had talked about this at one point, and how many are accepted by demographic. Because I think what that will tell us is a lot about this access and equity. Our open enrollment process serving the need of a specific demographic, or is it serving the need of all of our students? And so that's why I think it's really important to see that comparison of these are the demographics of our district. These are the demographics of who applies for open enrollment, sorry. And these are the demographics of who gets accepted. The other thing that I was struck by, and you go to, oh shoot, was it slide 7? Or we already slide, I don't want you to go back to it, but when it's going, and it shows that enrollment line starting in 2000, which I thought was interesting. One of the things that was, I thought, we shouldn't have the issues that we're having right now, except we built schools. So we created Don Calajon School in 2006, Central Park in 2017, and Agnew in 2021. So our enrollment actually doesn't look that bad. We are declining, but we also have 3 additional schools where those students are going to, which contributes to the smaller schools. And so that was just something that that's kind of stuck out to me. that's kind of the elephant in the room that we don't want to talk about, is that at the time, we didn't anticipate this declining enrollment or this declining birth rates worldwide. And while that was happening, we built 3 new schools. So that is a piece of the puzzle. And I guess one of the, am I being timed? Oh, okay. I keep waiting for the buzzer, sorry. And I'm like, can I keep talking? Okay. And I guess the reason why it struck me is because when I first was hired in this district, I was at Pomeroy and we were bursting at the seams. But that was before Central Park existed. And so it's kind of, you took this area that I used to have, Pomeroy and Sutter, and then you added a 3rd school. And it's kind of, we see the same thing with where we put Don Calajon, where we're having that same issue with their surrounding schools that are now being impacted by the bright new shiny school. So it's just something I'm throwing out there. I don't know if it's the right thing. This is a right forum, but it needs to be spoken about, I believe.
I just want to acknowledge that Ms. Gonzalez did give me data on the applicants for this school year and the prior 2 school years and I tied demographic information to that as well. I did not present that tonight in relation to all of the enrollment schools. I can bring that back to you. I was intending on it being a part of the choice program presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Trustee Fairchild because that is something I'm interested in as well. I would like to know from an equity lens who's applying for open enrollment. And I know we don't offer transportation for families that open enroll. And my concern is that that is a barrier to students from our north of 101 going to Milliken, going to Washington Open. Also, the part about Washington Open having a parental participation component to it. Some of our families aren't able to do that. And so I want to understand what the barriers are to some families not being able to open enroll. So to Trustee Fairchild's point, I think a demographics of who is open enrolling and why, and what may be some barriers to open enrollment for families, I think would be useful to know. Trustee Muirhead.
First, I wanted to add to your list, Trustee Fairchild, was we expanded Milliken to have an extra class per grade somewhere in the last number of years. So that also, I think, yeah. The other piece of data that I think that you could figure out is of the families that open enroll, since you said most of them happen in kindergarten, if a family doesn't get their open enrollment choice, how many of those end up enrolling in their neighborhood school versus never showing up? Because I heard a number at Washington. We were visiting Washington, Trustee Ratterman and I today, and they've done some surveys of their parents that were saying that if they didn't get into Washington Open, that they would have gone private or charter. And I'm wondering, if that's happening amongst, if they don't get into whatever school it is that they've open enrolled to, that if that's the school that they want to go to and they moved into this district to go to that school, whatever it might be, and they don't get in, what do they do? Do they try out their neighborhood school? And I would say you can't just look at kinder, because maybe they give it a chance in kindergarten and then decide, no, I've taken that year to find somewhere else outside. So I think it would be interesting because I know we've been told in the past, it's like if somebody never shows up, we have no way of knowing. But if they've open enrolled and don't show up, we do know about those. And that's, I don't even know what the scope of that number is, if it's just a handful or if it's a lot. But if it's a significant number, then that means that we're not meeting the needs of our community. And we might need to look at, is there something that we need to do to meet those needs because they want to be in our district, but they're not staying.
I can answer part of that. Ms. Gonzalez has this document that we routinely use in the district called an enrollment tracker. So when I went back and looked at the 2024-25 enrollment tracker, at the end of the school year, there were still 301 students on the open enrollment list that did not receive their request. And they were still students in our district.
But sorry, I want to clarify.
No.
I don't understand that.
That's not
But
accurate.
no, so they could
have been at their home. They could have been.
Could have been at their home school. We can, Mr. Lewis and I have talked about pulling that data. So we were gonna, I pulled the data of who's applied, who was offered, and who was waitlisted. And so we talked about looking at who was waitlisted and determining if they attended Santa Clara Unified or if they were a no-show. Now, for some of our kindergarten students, the way that we exit students for CalPADS reporting purposes is that if a student enrolled for kindergarten and they are a no-show, they are coded as like pre-enrolled, never attended, versus like a student who attends school and then leaves. We then get a proper exit code like California Public School, California Private School, out of country. And so for some of our students who are kindergartners who were no-shows, like they didn't come to our district, we're going to have to do a little bit more of looking at the data in terms, so we have an area in Aries that's called Other District Enrollment, where our school sites will write in the name of the school that the student has left to. So we can look through that data to see where some of our students who were no-shows are going to.
So even if they're a kinder no-show, they never had a day in our district, you'll know where they went?
Most, not all of them. A good percentage of them we will. It will depend on what information they provide to our school site staff, and then the information that is entered. Because if they don't come, they get a 470 code, which means they were pre-enrolled but did not show up. Versus if they do show up, then we have to then accurately indicate for CalPADS reporting where they went.
So I'd be interested in all of those numbers. It's like the ones that pre-enrolled and never showed, the ones that pre-enrolled went somewhere else that we know about, and not just before kinder, but also before first.
Yeah, we will look at that data for the students who were waitlisted.
We had an interesting example of the effect that you're talking about with Don Callaghan. So when we rebounded Don Callaghan, one of the big groups that had a large number of students was Mansion Grove. And after the rebounding, they weren't part of the Don Callaghan neighborhood school. Almost all of them left the district.
Yeah.
There was a small number that stayed, but almost all of them left the district because they didn't. The only reason they came was to go to that one school.
Trustee Canova?
So, and I don't know if this is data that you dig into, but I'd be really curious to know, because it's not just our district, but many districts are suffering a decline in enrollment across the region, across Silicon Valley. So when I look at our history as a district, why was it so difficult for us to find property to eventually build at Agnews? Well, our district 15 years prior had sold a lot of property, sold school sites, sold land away. And then at that time, they had declining enrollment, and it seemed the thing to do. But it turned out as time unfolded, that wasn't the thing to do, because later we grew, we needed schools, and we had sold the land and sold the schools away. So for our look into the future, it needs to be far enough to know, how shall I say, if in the next 5 to 10 years we grow again, the decisions we make right now are really critical. I mean, really critical. So what I would like to see in data, I don't know that you have it, is what's going on in the private school space? What's going on in the charter school space? I know that there's a component of families that are leaving the region because they can't afford to be here. Many of us know that in our own lives. Young people who went through our schools and graduated and are starting careers, and they're now recognizing they can't stay here because they can't get a house and they leave. And that's heartbreaking for our region. But I would be curious to know, is there a percentage of our students that are staying that are choosing private, even though it's a financial burden? Or are they choosing charter? I don't know if you have that data, but I'd be really curious to know the data. What's going on in that space?
So, as Ms. Gonzalez said, we will do together some deeper analysis around that question. But I do want to say that I pulled 49,000 records from our CalPEDS exit tables, and so it's in a general sense that encompass the last 3 years of kids exiting out of our system, and the total of that have the code, the transferred private, and again, some of these there's another code in here called Trans-US, which means that the student left California. I don't know why it says Trans-US, but they left California and they could have very well gone to a private school in another state. But for the one that is a private school in California, there were 342 students. And so that was about 0.7% of the total exits that we had. But I want to say that one of the things that made this so complicated is that there's another code that's used. It's by far it's the most primary one that we have in our district, which is a T160, and that is a student has left our district to go to another district. However, that's also the same code for moving from one school within your district to another school. And so what I quickly realized, I said, well, why do I have so many duplicates in my exits? And I saw that we had a significant number of students moving from one school to another school to another school in our district. And so each time they do that, they get an exit code. And so it's very nuanced trying to figure out, well, who are the actual kids who left our district? And additionally, we do have kids who are on the wait list for one school, but they are also on the wait list for another school. And neither one of those schools are their home school, but they got into, right? So like, for instance, their home school was Hughes. They got into Don Calajon. They're at Don Calajon, but they're on Agnew's wait list.
Because the thinking is obviously, and we see districts, San Jose Unified, I think, is talking about closing 9 schools. We're not to that place in our district yet, but the thinking that I have here is, are we looking at a future that's never going to get better? That is just going to continue to decline and decline and decline, and we're going to have smaller and smaller numbers of students to serve because this region no longer can support young families with kids. Is that our future, ironclad, no changes? Or is there opportunity for us to change, to grow, and to have students and gain families that can be here and thrive? We're in education, so a lot of what we do creates the ingredients you need for those students and those young families to be here and grow in the future right here. That's kind of our business. But as a district, we need to really look long down the line here, because we make decisions as a district to cut schools, for example, or sell property, for example. We could very easily, and we've done this in the past, we could very easily find ourselves in 5 or 10 years going, that was a terrible mistake.
Yes. Well, and can I just say that the code that is larger than our private school or even transferring out of California is transferring out of the US. So they left the country. There were about 897 kids.
Well, the other.
Over 3 years,
But,
yeah.
but
There's
that
Andy.
that 342 would not include those students who were not enrolled with us that were like pre-enrolled and never came. So
Correct.
that's important to note. Like, it's just not the 342. There are other students who have left the district that CalPEDS does not require us to have an exact exit code. Well, that requires us to code them 470.
Trustee Watanabe.
Thank you, President Lieberman. And this is definitely a lot of data for somebody that's new to this to absorb. But forgive me if I've missed it, but I know there's been a lot of talk about Millikan and Washington Open. Will we get some kind of a slide to show where they have those two particular schools have absorbed students from other schools to give us an idea of the demographics of those two schools. And because I think that would be really interesting to see. I know there are students in my neighborhood. I mean, Don Calajan is the home school for my neighborhood, but I do know there are students that are going to Milliken as well as Washington Open. And I would like to know how many are choosing to go, to either one of those schools, to just get an idea of how many are leaving Calajan to attend those schools, and all the other schools as well. What is the makeup of those two? So if you have already said it, if you could just repeat it. Otherwise, I think it would be interesting information to see. Thank you.
And Trustee Watanabe, I think that would be part of our conversation at our next meeting when we start talking about choice programs. That data we'll bring that data forward.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wright.
Trustee Ryan?
Yeah, first, just listening to the comments, and I know we're not really, like, we've decided to separate the two conversations. This is talking about open enrollment. Generally, we'll talk about choice programs in another meeting. But I do want to say, if we're looking at this question of, or I've heard it asked, and maybe it's just related to information we may need, but if we're looking about that some students may, or families may choose to leave the district if they don't get into their choice for open enrollment or a choice program, Milliken really has to be a part of that conversation. The wait lists there, I know when I joined the board, there were 800 students, more than 800 students waiting to get into that program, and the district never addressed it, didn't seem to care if the students, that was the impression I had from many community members I talked to, is that the district at that time didn't care if those families decided to leave. And the district could have that perspective. And this is what I, again, heard from families back in 2012 when we had more than 800 kids on the wait list. They felt the district could have that perspective because we were not attendance based in our funding. And I know because we've been able to expand, the school has moved, we've been able to expand the number of classrooms we have there, the wait lists have gone down. But if we are going to look at how many people leave if they don't get into their program, that either their open enrollment school that they have chosen or a program of choice, we'll need to look at Milliken as well. And then kind of to echo what Trustee Canova said, and I'm glad we're looking at the enrollment and at the schools now and what we need. But I would absolutely agree that no matter what we end up deciding to do as we look at this information, and I know these decisions are not anything that we're deciding tonight or anytime in the next probably few months, but I would absolutely agree that we should not be selling property for any reason. We have no idea what the future might hold, but also, to ever regain property again is incredibly expensive. So there's lots of ways we can use property that we maybe don't need in the current situation, but selling it would not be on the table for me. I know we did have an incident in the first year or so I think it was in the first year I was on the board, and it may have started shortly before I think it was started before I joined the board, but it was right in that year, maybe the before, where we sold a small piece of property. And there were lots of questions around that we probably shouldn't have sold it. We could have used it in a different way. So I totally agree with Trustee Canova about, whatever our assets are, selling them, I think for us is not what we want to be doing. Thank you.
Trustee Fairchild?
Thank you, President Lieberman. One of the things that would be helpful as far as other information that we would need in discussing this is I would like the open enrollment information disaggregated. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that we've lumped overloads and special ed into the open enrollment because it doesn't give an accurate picture of what it looks like for that school. And so I want to know the pure open enrollment numbers, and I would love to know the special ed numbers because those change depending on if they move a class, like Trustee Muir had brought up with Briarwood, you know, they lost a bunch over to Bowers because we moved that program temporarily. But if we're talking about open enrollment, we need to be talking about open enrollment. Okay, so that's something that I would need to address the, have a better conversation about this. And I have to say the slides that the way you have couched the data, other than that really the additional things I would like has been very helpful to really kind of get a picture. I think we need to get a really good picture district-wide. I mean, I know why we don't have time to go into all of the schools detail by detail. But one of the concerns I have as we move forward, and this is a hard conversation because some of the reasons why we have schools are more desirable, it's not necessarily that anyone's gone in and watched how the teachers are teaching. It's not necessarily that they've even checked out the neighborhood, the walking distance. It is purely done on greatschools.com or test scores. And that does not give the, that does not tell you about the heart and soul of a school. And so I'm reminded of a conversation I had around at Wilson Preschool when my oldest was getting ready to go to kindergarten. And a parent, we were talking about where we were going to school. And I had, I was an employee of the district. So at that time, I could have chosen any school I wanted. And she was shocked that I was choosing a neighborhood school. It was, and she plain said, we will go here, we will get in here, or we are moving to Cupertino. And I said, well, why? Had she gone and observed? No. It was based on the test scores. And sometimes I think it's really easy to not have that as part of our conversation. And yes, that is a priority for some of our families. Is that a priority that meets our value of equity and access for all students? Is that a priority that is going to meet the needs of keeping our schools balanced? And so I think it's really hard to have that conversation without talking about that. I want to give a little background. You can look up the school right now. Fernangeles Elementary, if you want to, in the San Fernando Valley. That's where I went to school. And I want you to look at those demographics. My father was an employee at the district office at LA Unified School District. He did not move us. The demographics have not changed. And I was just talking to my 6th grade teacher, and she said, it was so beautiful. We called your class the rainbow class because of the diversity. And if we value the diversity, we will continue to have policies that allow that diversity to continue district-wide and not be skewed to the level it's becoming at some of our schools.
Well, and I think also, I think Ms. Meltzer, at the beginning of this, you said that, you know, we have kind of a tension between choice and neighborhood schools. And I think that is at the crux of what the board and the greater community needs to decide. What's our value? What do we want to allow choice to the detriment of our neighborhood schools and the kind of those heart and soul communities that are a neighborhood school? Or do we value letting, just having choice? And I think until we decide what kind of school district we want to be, we aren't going to be, you can give us all the numbers you want and all the data you want and all the information. But until we decide the direction we want this school district to go, we're never going to come to a consensus on either of these programs, on either of these, choice or open enrollment, because they are in direct contradiction to each other. And I think we need to decide what we value, what we want to be, because we can't be both. It's very clear we can't be both, because if we're both, nothing is going to thrive. And seeing what's happening to our neighborhood schools like Pomeroy, Montague, Hughes, that breaks my heart, because those schools mean something to those communities. They provide services to those families that they're not going to get anywhere else, because those schools know those families. They know those kids. And so I think that we ultimately are going to have to decide who we are, what our identity is, and go from there, because we can't have what we're doing, because it's not successful, and it's killing our neighborhood schools. And I think that we need to have that discussion. Trustee Rotterman.
Sorry, we're not hearing Andy.
Apologies. I usually leave it on, but it's causing trouble if I do that. Do I need to repeat what I just said?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things I think we do need to consider is the fact that when we're looking at the schools in the future and how we're going to put things together, is that the birth rates have been declining worldwide as well as in the US. In the US, the birth rates have gone from, in the 1960s, we were doing approximately 23.9, something like that, students per thousand. Currently, it's at 11 students per thousand, less than half the birth rate. And also, if you look back at our schools, back in the 60s, 70s, I think we were in the 24,000 students, and we're now at 13, 14. So it tracks. I am a fan of choice schools. I think they provide something that fits a niche. I think when we have to be really careful that all of our schools don't do exactly the same thing, because there's going to be kids where that doesn't fit them well. And sometimes, like for instance, a Millikan is almost a diametric opposite to a Washington Open. There's kids that will thrive in both and won't do well in our others. And so we need to do that. I do believe that's there. One of the things that's stressing the neighborhood schools currently is declining enrollment. So as the enrollment declines, suddenly you're having trouble with class sizes and everything else. And then it's like, well, okay, is the choice school the problem? Because the kids are being sucked away from these neighborhood schools into choice schools, and you're suddenly blaming the neighborhood schools' challenges on the choice schools. And I don't think that's necessarily the right approach. I think one of the things that we also need to do, and I think it's going to be extremely important that we do, is that first off, I agree with Trustee Fairchild. We absolutely need to know the difference between the people that voluntarily went to the school versus the ones that were offloaded or that were placed there through special education. Once we do that, I think we need to go to the ones who voluntarily chose to go to whatever school and take a look at and find out what their motivation was. Why did you decide to go to Montague, or why did you decide to go Washington Open, or why did you decide to go wherever it is they went? That'll give us a better clue into what the motivation and what's happening, and whether or not there is an equitable problem, because sometimes that motivation may be something undesirable. Sometimes it's something very desirable. And I think we need to understand why they're doing this. Is this because they're all trying to segregate into one particular group, or is it because they like the program better? So I think that's an important piece of data that we need to collect before we can make any informed decisions relative to choice schools, and which is coming up, I know, doing that. Another thing I thought that was really good, and somebody brought up, I think it might have been Trustee Fairchild, I'm just picking on her today, but the kids, the parents don't always know why they're putting their kids in the school or what they are. They're working off gossip and rumor and various things. In the old days, it was the STAR test, the test scores. Paul Perotti put together a program, I think it was Paul that did it, where he had a bus that would go from school to school, and they would have the parents come in and they'd go visit the different schools. They would get a sense of what these schools are about, why this school is unique, why that school does something else. And I think that's something we should consider looking at, something similar to that in a parent education area. So those are just a few thoughts that I have. I really appreciate all the data. I think there's some, the beauty of the data that you've got, what it's doing, I think the data here doesn't answer the right questions. I think what it does is it presents us an opportunity to ask the right questions. Why is that going on? Why did this happen? Why is this ratio wrong? What's happening here? So I think this report is extraordinarily valuable from the perspective, it's like the old scientific process. You know, you see something and your instincts tell you there's something going on there. Then you go ahead and make a hypothesis, then you check it out and find out whether what your thoughts were right. And I think you've given us the tools to start that, but that's the steps I think we need to take to go forward. Thanks.
Trustee Muirhead?
Another thing that some previous comments from some of the other trustees made me think about is how we market our schools to incoming families. So when they have a preschooler, you know, what kind of marketing, what kind of push are we going out to these families and saying, hey, come check us out, versus waiting for them to show up to check out the school. I know a bunch of years, I kind of think of things as pre-COVID and post-COVID, and this is one that was definitely pre-COVID. We put together a document about our middle schools that for each middle school had like a 2-page spread about what was great about their school, what was interesting about what they're doing, how it was different from each one, so that parents, we saw a big drain of parents, you know, of families from 5th grade to 6th grade. So let's tell them about our middle schools, and so they have more information about them. And I'm wondering if we, you know, I look at some of these schools, like Montague lost 95 of their 238 students. That's not quite a half, but more than a third of their students left. It's like, do they know what they're leaving? You know, at some of these schools, do they, you know, are they just looking at test scores or their you know, local moms group, or are they really, you know, asking questions about our schools? And you know, sometimes I feel like, you know, Santa Clara Unified doesn't get a whole lot of press. We're just sort of like, we're doing the work and we're, you know, moving forward, and you know, press isn't always good press, so it's kind of nice to stay out of the news, but it also means that parents don't have any, like, a frame of reference of what makes a good elementary school or middle school or high school. Why should I go to my neighborhood school? Like you were saying, you know, surprised that you were sending your child to a neighborhood school. And when you're just in preschool, you don't necessarily know anything. And maybe you're talking to your preschool teacher or others around you. What are we doing to really like push our message out? Like, are the families around Montague getting any sort of publication saying, hey, come and check out Montague on this date? And I'm just using Montague as an example, but you know, there's our open house is this date. Come and check us out. Even, you know, even though you don't have a student in our school yet, you can still come and see what the school is all about. I don't know if there's any, you know, our open house season is coming up. Has any mailings gone out to families or, you know, the neighborhood saying, you know, if you have a student, come and check us out. We've, and this is, some things that are really great about this school. I just wonder for the same reason that I'm wondering how many are going private. It's like, well, how many people just don't know about our schools? And the same thing going to middle school and going to high school. Some of those families leave at that point, I think, because they think that those, our schools are, the middle schools are bigger and they're kind of scary, or the high schools are even bigger. And what does that mean for my child? I think it would be, I don't know, it could be helpful to know if doing some marketing of our schools would help.
I just want to remind trustees, we have 30 more slides to go through. So we need to, yeah, we are. There's still middle school and high school data to look at. So if we can have these be the last few comments so we can continue on, that'd be good. Trustee Canova.
But what I wanted to say, okay, I've heard Andy talk about how he supports choice. Bonnie, what you said about the neighborhood school was beautiful. It really is about the neighborhood school. It's a beautiful thing. I think the neighborhood school from, just an environmental perspective, having a school close to your home, the issue, the impact on transportation issues and everything else, the cohesiveness of a community. I don't think it's either or. I think for the choice schools that we have that have had success, and we talked about the branding, we talked about the marketing and the reputation, and all that's real. But I think, to me, at least in my mind, they should be more like R&D. These choice schools that have various types of success, where they have quite a loyal following. But their discoveries in terms of the successes they have shouldn't just stay at those schools. They should be embraced by all our schools. So that neighborhood school can have, for those families close to home, all the features of that choice school that people have been fighting to go to for so long. Let all our schools benefit from the successes that our open choice schools have developed. It shouldn't be just held by those schools alone and not shared by the other sites. Let the success be something that every school site enjoys. I think if I'm pushed to choose between the choice or the neighborhood school, I'm going to lean to the neighborhood school, because just from the perspective of the district as a whole, if we allowed local schools to die on the vine and close down and get sold, that's not in the interest of our future. So we really need to maintain that infrastructure. We have real neighborhood schools close to our kids. The whole notion of our kids getting to school by riding a bike, the healthy things, walking, all these things that are such a big part of the quality of life. Sitting, they say, is the new smoking. Look at us all. We're like a bunch of smokers in here. We're sitting, but we want our kids to move. We want our kids to think. We want our kids to grow. We want them to prosper. A neighborhood school really helps that happen. So don't let just a handful of schools develop things that are really successful and it's just theirs. It only belongs to them and no one else. It belongs to all of us. I gotta go do.
Trustee Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. It's been interesting to listen to the comments from other trustees. I would totally agree with Trustee Fairchild's comment that, a lot of parents think about wanting to move to open enroll in a different school or a choice program, and they base a lot of that based on what they hear from other people. So rumors or the scores back, I think Trustee Martin was correct, back when we had the STAR test scores and there was an API score, people looked at that and assumed that was a ranking of schools and as some, which wasn't necessarily accurate. And they use reviews that they see other places, and they base a lot of decision on that without actual experience at a school. And so, yes, we want to be sure we promote our schools, but I also would say, and I remember reading this book and I was trying to look it up so that I could share it, but back when I think it was shortly before I joined the board, I read a book that was designed for parents about what to look for at a school, because I'm not sure, even if you bring in families and say, hey, come look and see what we're doing, maybe that gives them some firsthand experience and maybe they feel more comfortable at their neighborhood school because they've seen it in operation. But I'm also not sure that parents necessarily know the things they need to look for. One of the things I remember reading from that book was about phonics instruction. And so if you're touring a school and you're not seeing that in the early grades, that can be a concern. And there was the data to back up how phonics instruction was important to learning reading. But I don't know that parents even have the information coming on a school tour and visiting a few classrooms for a few minutes. I'm not, while that might feel good, and I certainly encourage that and would like to see it in our district, I don't know that gives parents real information. They may also see something that in one little interaction they didn't like and might color their whole impression. So I want to be careful that we think that that's somehow how parents are going to learn more, or, if they were already hesitant about their neighborhood school, that will change their mind. It may not. But I also want to say, and I've supported choice programs before, but I also want to say we're a unified school district. And, to that point, Trustee Canova just said, and echoing Trustee Lieberman, we're a unified district. I think there's something there about having a cohesive experience at all of our schools, that you get strong academics, strong teaching, strong learning, strong student support at any of our schools. And your neighborhood school provides that for the students in your neighborhood. Versus, I think if we take a bus tour, we invite parents to go on a bus tour of all the schools, that's actually might be encouraging parents to open enroll, and we'll see more open enrollment because they'll see something at one school and now want to open enroll there. So for me, as one trustee, I think we want to make sure we have a unified experience at all of our neighborhood schools, and that parents can feel confident that their neighborhood school provides excellent academics, excellent education, excellent student support, what kids need to thrive and be successful at any school in our district, at every neighborhood school. That's the direction I lean more toward. Thank you.
Trustee Fairchild.
I was just noticing that you received slip for public comment, and I was wondering if, for the length, because of the length of this presentation, if we wanted to take public comment after the elementary section, and then public comment after the middle school section, and then public comment after the high school section.
We can do that. I was going to take public comment and then take a little bit of a 5-minute break.
Okay. I just because it's one of those times I think we should maybe
because
allow.
The presentation is in blocks. So I think
long.
I think it makes logical sense because both of these comments are about elementary school. So I think it's worth doing. So we'll take public comment right now, and then the board will take just a brief stretchy break and such, and then we'll come back and start middle school. So Michelle Hopper and Anne Marie Sierra. And Trustee Canova is manning the timer for you.
I think it's on. Is it on? Oh yeah. Okay. All right. You ready? Hello, Dr. Wright, President Lieberman, and esteemed board members. My name is Michelle Hopper, and I'm a second grade teacher at Montague. I come to you tonight to speak on how enrollment has affected Montague in the last few years. In 2019, Montague had 426 students. Our current enrollment is 236 students. There are many contributing factors to this: COVID, new school opening, open enrollment, a new choice school program, and families moving out of the area. While some of these factors are out of our control, there is something we can control or change. Over the last 4 years, Montague has had multiple meetings with HR personnel and superintendents. In each of these meetings, we have asked if redrawing district boundaries had been a consideration, since there are many schools that are slowly getting smaller. At each meeting, we were told that there was a boundaries committee. However, the 2 staff members that sit on this committee have heard nothing regarding meetings or boundaries. I feel it is important that this committee meet and look into redrawing the district boundaries to help stabilize our schools and possibly help stabilize the enrollment across our district. In addition to looking into redrawing boundary lines, we would like the district to consider capping open enrollment to 2 schools per grade level at each site. As you know, with a small school comes a smaller budget. As our enrollment has continued to drop, so has the interventions at our site. Next year, our school support site TOSA will be cut due to budgetary reasons. Since 2020, Montague has not met the criteria for Title I status. Consequently, we are utilizing internal resource allocations to maintain our essential student intervention services. Lastly, while all schools are unique, we feel that the district should take the time to market the smaller schools for what makes them special. Taking the time to highlight our smaller schools can result in positive reviews on great schools or other platforms that parents look at when they are enrolling their child in a school. For example, Montague is a place where everyone knows your name. When thinking about enrollment, please think of how it is affecting our smaller schools and consider revisiting our district boundaries and capping open enrollment. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening. And just so you know, this is like half of our staff. If they would stand up, this is literally half of our staff right here. So just a picture.
Alrighty, so most of what I said, actually, you guys have said, but I think it's really good to just hear from the public in and of itself. So while I appreciate the refinement of the open enrollment process in the last few years that has prevented families from open enrolling to two completely philosophically different sites, like back in the day, it was number one was Millikan, number two was Washington Open. Those choices by families are very telling about how families are making choices. There's still work to be done in open enrollment. Over the years, several themes have arisen. Test scores, we've kind of already talked about that. There's often misunderstandings about how the demographic of a school may affect school-wide data, but not specifically a family's own child in their demographic area. They look at like school-wide data, but they don't look at their own student. And then we talked about this too, family perceptions of a school. The worst of which is if we read any social media reviews can be highly offensive and quite shocking to those of us who value the diversity of our multilingual learners. And then the other one, which is more often than not, because as a kindergarten teacher, I often do incoming kinder interviews and talk to people, and they'll say that they were told not to go to our school. Sometimes they get stuck at our site, and then they're told because they didn't get into their open enrollment choice. And then they'll say things like, oh my gosh, we're so happy we stayed because it's such a great school. I don't understand why people told us not to go here. And that brings me kind of to my last point. Well, no, there's two actually. That was before I started typing. The misinformation or lack of personal experience at our neighborhood schools. So back in the day when we had to enroll at a school, people walked on the campus. So you kind of actually got a feel for the actual campus. While I appreciate what the enrollment center has done, it's kind of created a little bit of a unintended result in that people don't know the campus that they're walking into. They've never seen a single person. They're very disconnected from what they could be doing. And then kind of what was already talked about is before COVID, we always did kindergarten. Oh God, I'm gonna get cut off. We always did kindergarten tours, and those are a thing that kind of some of us started again, but I don't know how Enrollment Center could possibly like actually promote those on a mass level that are things that I think should start happening again.
Viola Smith.
Hi. Okay. So, speaking as, yes, I'm an employee. Yes, I'm a principal of a choice school. And I'm speaking as a parent. I was a parent who open enrolled, and I made a choice to send my kids to, I don't even know if I should say the name of the school, but it was Millikan. And, and the reason I wanted to point that out is because in hearing the discussion and the conversation, my big thing, my platform, my soapbox, my passion is always going to be equity, and is always going to be working to close the opportunity gap. And so that's why I made that specific choice. I wanted my kids, my neighborhood school is right down the street. Literally, this is my neighborhood. And I wanted the program that school offered. It wasn't about my neighborhood school being, bad or, a negative thing. It was what I wanted for my children. I wanted basics. I belong to that demographic. They belong to that achievement gap, which isn't an achievement gap. It's an opportunity gap demographic. And so I wanted to ensure that regardless of what happened, they got the basics that they needed as the foundation for the springboard for the rest of their educational tenure and journey. And I'm going to say, yes, they did marvelously well. Not because of, partly because of me and my husband. I will say there was some genetics up in there, and as there are for, everybody, forgive me. But I wanted that for them. And I don't want us making a choice for other families saying, well, you have to have this format of a neighborhood school. Find out what the families want, and let's offer more of that in our schools. Thank you.
Okay, that was my last slip. If there's anyone else that would like to speak, now is the time. Otherwise, we'll open again after the next.
President Lieberman,
Is there someone in the Zoom?
there's 2 people on the Zoom.
Okay.
Okay, for members of the public attending through Zoom who would like to speak, please use the Zoom's raise hand tool. Public speakers will be called upon in the order that hands were raised. There will be a 2-minute timer on the screen, I believe. If not, yes. Okay, thank you. Similar to the one we have in the boardroom to help you moderate your comments. To ensure everyone has the same amount of speaking time, we will have to move on to the next commenter after 2 minutes. When your name is called, you will be prompted by Zoom to unmute. Our first speaker is Emmeline. Hold on. You should be able to speak, Emmeline.
Yes, hi. I wanted to talk about special education students and how they are often treated as separate from the rest of the district. And the lack of attention in tonight's presentation regarding how SAI placements interact with open enrollment is an example of that. While data on students with an IEP was presented, please remember that students with an IEP is not synonymous with SAI students. Excluding SAI students from these conversations is unacceptable. They are not simply movable pieces. Because SAI classes only exist in certain schools, special education students may be placed outside their home school. If those students are then mainstreamed, they are sent back to their home school, where they may not have an existing support system or have any sense of community. If a family like mine wishes to remain at the school where their child was placed, we have to hope will be accepted through open enrollment. Open enrollment was also important for our kids to be able to attend the same school. I know firsthand the importance of having open enrollment to support continuity and community for families in special education. As I said, we went through the process. We were successful in enrolling both of our children at Ponderosa after the district had placed our older child there for kindergarten. Unfortunately, we were not successful in getting open enrollment to continue at Peterson. Because it was important for us to maintain our school community, we moved. Not everyone has the ability to do that. As the district reconsiders the open enrollment policy, I urge you to improve the policy to ensure special education students have the option for a stable community from elementary through graduation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next speaker is Kaushik.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you. We can hear you.
All right, well, I'm in the room next to Emmeline, and I was prepared to tell our story about our family, but she's done such a great job of that. So I just wanted to talk about a few things I think that are important to me that hopefully are also important to this process for you all, which is figuring out the priorities will really drive what we're trying to do. I forget which trustee said this, but like we have a choice to make here. And I also want us to remember the choice between, parent choice, equity in schools, these different options. There's also kind of second order effects of these decisions. Someone else talked about, closing schools a long time ago, then led to suddenly not enough schools in the 10-year ago frame. And now we've made the same mistake in the other direction. In the same way, if we close off open enrollment, that's going to have other effects. It's not magically going to force all those people into that neighborhood school. Some of them will go to open enrollment. Some of them will go to the local school. Some will go to private schools. Some will move out of the district. We don't quite yet know, but we do see some examples in real world politics, like the billionaires tax that didn't force, but people chose to leave rather than fear of taxes, or immigration policies where we make these big decisions to close down borders and hope for the best. But instead, maybe we should be asking, since this is all Santa Clara and we all care about all these schools, how do we make the schools better? Part of it is communication. Part of it is these gaps that people are actually seeing, that people are choosing to go to these the open enrollment schools. What's not available at the schools that they're at? I want to take the last 30 seconds to talk a little bit about Ponderosa, which I'm most familiar with, where when you look at, I've been on the school site council now 6 years, it's a school, yes, but then if you break the school itself down by race or socioeconomic status or disabilities, the results of the students are very different depending on who you are. It's not just open enrollment. There is also an issue of equity. Regardless of open enrollment, we are failing students who need the most help. That's where we should focus our energies, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, sir. That is the last person with their hand up in the Zoom. Thank you. Oh, wait, someone just popped up. I apologize. We have one last speaker, Amanda Rigas. You should be able to speak.
Hi, yes, thanks so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you. We can hear you.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to speak briefly about my experience. I'm I'm the parent of a kindergartner who open enrolled. And I just want to touch a little bit on some of the questions and points that some of the trustees made. So, I did not grow up in the school district and had little sort of experience or awareness of the public schools. The only schools I really heard about were Millikan and Washington Open. Those were really the only schools that I heard about without digging into it. And when as the time came closer to figure out, where to go to school, I looked at the neighborhood school a little bit, heard, some mixed reviews, actually heard from another parent friend about another school in the area, not a choice school, Central Park Elementary. And I even found a teacher that was willing to give a tour, but then her principal said, no, we're not allowed to give tours. Our neighborhood school, there was no option for us to go see that school. So the only school that I could go to see were the schools that offer tours. Washington Open, I'm not sure if Millikan did or not. So, I felt like this, some of the comments that the school board made, really spoke to me. It was hard for me to know. Could not get enough information about the public schools. And if I didn't have the option to go see a school like Washington Open, we probably would have picked a private school. Another comment that I heard from a trustee, which, I thought was a little bit troubling, was this sense of conflict between the neighborhood choice, the neighborhood schools and the choice schools. Washington Open's actually closer to where we live than our home zone school. We're actually biking to school, and we feel like there is like a heart and soul of that school too. So that trustee saying that the neighborhood school's heart and soul is ripped apart, what about these choice schools that families have devoted so much time to?
Thank you very much for your comment. Now I believe that is the last person in the Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Meltzer. Okay, we'll take a quick break before we move to middle school. So we'll be back at like 1:45. The board is returning from its break. That was a little bit longer than we thought, but we are back now to pick up where we left off in demographic trends. I can speak. Middle school.
Thank you, President Lieberman. So we will move into our middle school data discussion. And so just as we began with the elementary, looking at the demographic trends, we will look at the middle school demographic trends. So here is, again, our overall 6th through 8th grade enrollment. And it'll play again, but just to give you a general sense of how it's following, the top one is our overall 6th through 8th. So it follows the elementary trend, but we can see our changing demographics. Okay. And then, oops. Apologies. I'm sorry, I'm mixed up with my clicker here. What happened to the? Sorry, here. Oh, I don't know what's going on with it. Oh, sorry. Okay, so and here are the student groups. So also the same thing as we saw with the elementary. These are percentages of students within each one of the various student groups. And so unlike with elementary, where we saw an increase in our IEPs for our middle schools, it's been pretty stable. But the economically disadvantaged and English learner populations are declining, are in duplicative pupils. And there is a rise in 504 plans. Okay, so our middle schools, so similarly to elementary, here is that overall table that just presents a graphic form, what I'm about to talk about in each one of these slides. Here we have Bookser. Their school of residence count was 746. The open enrollment loss was calculated at 94. Just doing a quick look at the information within my spreadsheet. Again, I am committing to bring a more disaggregated version of this data to you that it absolutely encompasses the IEP placements, the interdistrict transfers. Right now, my data shows that there are 15 students who that applies to. One of those scenarios, the majority being interdistrict approved. So that 94 would really be minus 15, or yes, minus 15 of the loss. And so the open enrollment gain is plus 48. Their current enrollment is 700. So net enrollment loss was 46, or 46 minus 15. I'm not going to do math. And then there are the demographics associated with those groups. And so, excuse me, 31, okay. And then again, your open enrollment gain demographics, again, this was an attempt to say broad picture, right? Those who are applying to Bookser, what are their demographics? Okay. And then again, we have the resident school. So the percent of what it would look like if every student who was zoned to Bookser attended Bookser, and then what it actually looks like. All right, and then here we have Huerta. And so Huerta had 17 students in that category of non-exact open enrollment, with the majority being IEP placements, 8 out of 17 being IEP placements. But you can see here that the majority of those students who are not at their open enrollment school are going to Don Calajon. Okay, and then demographics, resident, school of resident in orange, current enrollment in green. This is Cabrillo. So Cabrillo, unlike the previous middle schools has a net enrollment gain. They did receive 118 kids. And let me see, Cabrillo, so 13 of those were other placements than open enrollment. So of those 118, 13 of those kids were from something else, the majority of which being admin placements. Of those 13 for Cabrillo.
So Cabrillo also houses our SLI program starting at the 7th grade level.
So we will be looking at SLI at the next meeting. Okay. And then their demographics overall, we will also be looking at the demographics of the various programs when we dive into that. School overall. And then here is Peterson. So again, we have that net enrollment gain plus 55. And Peterson, of course, has historically housed our Peterson Plus program. Okay, and again, the demographics of those who are applying or who have entered the school versus those who have left. And the associated in counts. And then those school demographics overall.
Trustee Fairchild.
So going back to Peterson. So this is 6 through 8. You have 28 students, 24 at Cabrillo. How many of those going to Cabrillo are for
The SLI?
The SLI program?
I don't have that number in front of me. That will be.
I don't have the exact number, but I would probably say a large number of those students. Oh.
Well, 50 from the other schools. I'm just wondering, just looking at this from Peterson, because they're coming from Peterson, Booksur, Don Calajan, and Huerta. How many of those 24? Because this is a very low open enrollment loss for Peterson.
We will bring it back at the next meeting with the SLI information.
Correct. Yes. So we will be bringing those back to you. Okay, and then this is Don Calajan's middle school, 6 through 8. And so again, of the relatively few students who are leaving Don Calajan, 19 are going to Cabrillo, 8 are going to Huerta, and 2 to Peterson. And Calajan, according to my data, only has 2 students who fell into the other types of placements, one being admin and another one being intra-district. What did I say? Oh, Cabrillo. Sorry, I meant Calajan. Yes. And then here are their homeschool demographics and their current enrollment.
Rotterman?
A quick question or maybe an observation. On the main chart, it shows that the economically disadvantaged, is a different one, not here, has been declining.
Mm-hmm.
When I look through here, most of these show that on the current demographics, that the economically disadvantaged have increased. Now, I couldn't do the math in my head for 4 schools, but is there a factor that's causing the economically disadvantaged overall decline? Is there one school where that's hitting hard? Because I didn't see it. So in that case, it's increased.
Also, let's look at the first one. So Bookser.
It's increased.
Well, so their home school is 251 economically disadvantaged. Their current enrollment is 246. So the percentage is increasing, but that will happen when your overall enrollment decreases.
Well, go back to the slide that shows this one. Yeah. See, that showed a large decrease in economically disadvantaged. I was surprised to see the numbers. I guess that's one point in time, so that's for the year, and these are figures with that number in it. So I
It
guess
is,
it's okay.
it is, it's also the data that's presented here covers the last 3 school years. That decline is coming from 2020, 21 to 2025, 26.
Right, well, these numbers are a point in time, which is the end of that list. So I can see why it's there. But I'm fascinated by that declining economic number. It implies that either everybody's getting a lot better jobs or the people that can't afford it are moving out. I think it's the latter. Sorry for interrupting.
Question.
If I can add to that, also what makes that even more interesting is that the total number of middle school students had also declined during that time period. So in order to have that type of a drop with the drop, it has to be even a bigger decline.
Thank you, Trustee Ratterman, for pointing that out. I would like to go back to the economically disadvantaged slide, because one of the things that I noticed as a parent is with the advent of universal meals, I wonder, and if you look at the decline, boom, that's when it happens. Is that it seems to be a correlation. I know correlation is not causation, between the advent of universal meals and the identification of kids who are economically disadvantaged or not.
Well, what I would say is that we know that once that happened, it did hurt the data collection around that particular demographic group. We also, I think our own policy switched from using just strictly meal applications to a secondary form that we could have used as a site. But honestly, Karen Luna would be probably the best person to answer questions about that.
I just know because one of the things that is interesting is I like packing my children lunch, but sometimes they come home with a full lunch because they just went and ate lunch. Even though I love that they have access, to the free meals, but I just have always felt we've seen this data over and over again, and just wonder if we need to do a better job collecting. And the reason I bring that up is because it does affect Title I status. And perhaps that's something we need to look at, because while it would be an interesting concept that the people just all have moved away, I have not seen a decline in the service jobs that tend to align with that demographic. And so I think it's something for us to look at, because some of our schools are missing that Title I designation as a result of this decline in being economically disadvantaged. That makes sense to you?
It does. The only other thing caveat that I would say is that the free and reduced meal price calculations are a little bit different than the economically disadvantaged. Economically disadvantaged includes things like parent education level. And so you can be not a college graduate and, be included in this number, or you could be a college graduate but be in a lower income job. They're not synonymous.
So when you come back next time, I'd like to have a definition of that.
economic.
Because I think trustee Fairchild hit the nail on the head. I think that's where that's coming from. Because the rest of it doesn't make a lot of sense, which is why I brought it up.
But I think it's also, oh geez, I think it's also interesting that the EL multilingual learner also goes down at the same time. And that's not tied to like free meals. Not as much, but it's
I say I want the definition. I think it's a combination of things. But because that just jumped off the page at me when I saw that. What's going on?
Okay, I will look into that. Okay, so are we pausing for middle school?
Yes, I was going to say, are there any additional questions or thoughts? Why don't we go to the next slide? Or discussion items that you want to take into consideration before moving on to high school, as it relates specifically to middle school?
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that have changed a little bit in the middle schools. Bookser at one time had a reputation that it's regaining of being a music school. I mean, everybody said, wow, what a phenomenal music program they had. It dipped and now it's coming back up. Matter of fact, I think it's doing really, really well. I don't know if the reputation has caught up with it. But I'd like to see how that plays in things. And then, of course, the arts and design at Don Callaghan. I don't want to see if there's any way we can say what type of impact or that's had on the school with the enrollment, et cetera. You'd have to look at how that rolled out and what level of success it. So, and then of course there's the SLI program at Cabrillo, which we can almost see from this data, how that's affecting. And then Peterson Plus at Peterson, of course. But those are I'm curious how those programs are affecting the overall picture. And I've got a few ideas of what's happening, but I'd like to see if we've got data that can, without me prejudicing the process.
Trustee Fairchild?
Thank you. I don't know what I missed, but in looking at the middle schools, one of the concerns that I have, or I don't know if it's a concern, but I think it's something we need to pay attention to. If you look at where our specialized programs are, so we have the dual immersion program and we have the SLI program, and both of those will feed into Santa Clara High, which is great. However, you're creating two choice schools going into Santa Clara High. The Callaghan STEAM will feed into McDonald. And so I worry about us creating an imbalance in our high schools as a result of our middle school programming. Not that it's going to happen, but when you have these tracks, like all those kids getting into these choice programs and therefore being tracked right into a certain high school, it's not a whole lot of kids, but it's just something I think we should be aware of. Does that make sense?
Yes. Trustee Muirhead?
I had a question about how how open enrollment works for the students who are going from 5th grade DLI into Bookser. Do they go through the open enrollment process and do they get denied potentially? No, they're automatically into Bookser whether it's their homeschool or not?
Correct. Yeah, they're automatically similar to our SLI program. The SLI students used to have to apply for open enrollment, and then if they didn't get in they had to do an intra-district transfer. And so because they have been accepted into this program, they automatically get enrolled into the feeder where that program is. And so our SLI students automatically get enrolled into Santa Clara High School if they're going to be enrolled into that program. And then our DLI students will automatically get enrolled into Booksir if they're going to continue in the DLI program.
And how many students are there per grade level at the DLI at Booksir in 6th grade now? Do you know?
15.
15, yeah.
15?
Yeah, 32 next year.
15 in 6th grade, and then 15 in 7th grade, and 33
But 32 coming in. So, so to understand these numbers, so when it says for Booksir, 48 came in, that does not include the SLI student, DLI students. Why is it that DLI and SLI are such similar?
That includes the DLI students if Booksir was not their home school, their school based on their address.
Okay, so they get in, so they don't have to go through the open enrollment, but you're including them in the open enrollment numbers.
Correct.
Just so I'm understanding. I'm not complaining or anything. I just want to understand what that means. So 15 of those 48 were the dual language kids.
Not all 15, because some of those 15, their home school is Booksir.
Okay. And then Trustee Fairchild made this comment about Booksir and Cabrillo going into Santa Clara High. It used to be that Booksir split, but now with the new schools, is that no longer true? Does all of Booksir go to Santa Clara High?
But yeah, Booksir feeds to Santa Clara High.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Trustee Fairchild?
This is not that necessary, but I do feel I must say, as an alumni of my kids being alumni at Cabrillo, that they have a pretty good music program there too. So, and I would like to say that I think, and Peterson, and I think what we are seeing is the investment in music that we have made over the years. And so it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, and I just got to respond to that. I want to be careful that people don't think, I believe that's what's currently happening. But if you go back 20 years ago, Booksir was known for its music program, and different schools had different things they're known for. And recently, Booksir has brought their program up great. Cabrillo's fantastic. We've got, in general, our schools are doing really well. We made huge investments in music, and it's paying off. So thank you.
I think one of the things that this music conversation is bringing up is something that Trustee Ryan has said before, was that all our schools should have these same opportunities. That it shouldn't matter which school you go to, you should have access to these opportunities. I feel like it's just, I like the kids that are in SLI have to go to Santa Clara. Not that that's bad, but why can't kids at Wilcox have the same opportunity to participate in those capstone programs, that curriculum that goes with that? Why should it be dependent on open enrollment to have access to some of these programs? To me, all of these things should be accessible to any student in our district, not just because they decided to apply to a program at Cabrillo or to Booksir. I think that's what I get hung up on, that I would like to see these opportunities available to every student at every school. But, that's a conversation for another time.
I think that's really interesting because I think about Calijon and how its enrollment was just dropping and dropping. And then they made the effort. It took them a while and a couple of false starts to come up with the DCADS program. And now they're attracting kids again. And so, yes, all of our kids should have the opportunities, but there's also something to schools having something that's really good about them. It's like, oh, if you want arts and design, you might want to check out Calijon. And all of our schools do art, and all of our schools have some STEM component with the design in it. I mean, they're making leprechaun traps. at probably lots of schools today. So it's interesting the difference between like a focus versus all of our kids have opportunities. I think, yes, it's very true that all of our kids need opportunities, but that doesn't mean that a school can't have a particular interest of the community to focus on something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying every school has to be the same. I'm just saying that I wish some of these opportunities were accessible without having to open enroll, because then that limits kids who maybe can't open enroll because they can't get to that school, so they can't do SLI because they can't get to Booksir or Cabrillo or wherever the school is, to take advantage of that. And that's what bothers me about it. It's the access that bothers me about it. Not the fact that the schools have these programs, it's that they're not equally accessible if you don't have the ability to commute there. Because you have to open enroll to Booksir to do DLI. Well, but if you're closer to a Peterson and you can't get there, then you can't do that program. So that's the equity piece that bothers me about it. Trustee Rotterman.
Yeah, and I think this is a conundrum that every school district probably struggles with. One of the things I'd like to see us do on the educational side of this question is maybe give a little bit of a report when we talk about choice schools or special schools on magnet programs, how they've worked in the past, whether they've been successful, whether after they've done magnet schools, there have been serious problems or inequities that took place. The other thing about this is, I think that there are some programs that the option is either you have a focus on this particular program, or you don't have the program at all because you don't have the capacity. So I think part of the solution to that is if you have, let's take art and design. I think every one of our schools should have art programs and have options there for it. There may be one school, though, that takes it a level higher that we can't support universally through all the schools. There either isn't enough interest in it, or it's prohibitive to put that program together for a variety of reasons. So I think that, it's always a matter of balance, and I don't think you eliminate the special programs that you have out there for the sake of equity. I think you find a way to get the equity and still allow those programs for the people where that niche is really important to them, and you can offer them something that they couldn't get someplace else. So I think we have to be careful about that. So for instance, I would have loved to have gone to science and engineering school when I was in school. There's my daughter would have been in humanities. She'd want to go to something in English and et cetera, which is what she teaches now. So I think figuring out a balance there, trying to be sure there is a baseline support for all of the items, whether it's art or music or engineering or whatever. And then I've run out of time. Two minutes is 2 minutes.
Okay. Any other comments from trustees, or I'm going to ask for public comment? Trustee Fairchild.
Oh.
Why don't you let Trustee Ryan go?
Oh.
Trustee Ryan.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to echo kind of Trustee Lieberman what you had to say too, that, the problem is, while it's great to offer, we talk about a middle school student really wanting to do art and design, and so they should be able to have that special program at one school and open enroll. The problem this gets into is if you're a student at Peterson, but Huerta has this amazing program you really want to be a part of, but you have no way to get there. Your parents can't get you there. I was just trying to pick the most extreme kind of distances within our district. It's basically unobtainable. And so, as I've said before about many of these special opportunities, I'd like to see them. We need to figure out which ones are most important. I would like us to figure out which ones are most important to our mission, to our goals for our students, and then make sure that students at every school can get those and have those opportunities, versus only, they're only open to students whose families have the flexibility to be able to transport them to a school that may be quite a distance away on a daily basis. And there's equity issues involved with that. So I do want us to learn what's special and unique about these programs, what really is essential to us, and replicate that to the greatest extent we can so that all of our students can benefit.
Trustee Fairchild?
Thanks, President Lieberman. I want to echo what I said earlier when looking at the elementary demographic trends. We have essentially a very similar number of middle school students from 2000 coming back down to 2025, 2026. The difference is we have built 2 schools. So when we're looking at the middle school data from 2000, 2001, we had Peterson, Cabrillo, and Buxer. And now we also have Don Calajan and Huerta. And I guess the question is are we making the right decisions that will keep all of these schools viable and serving the students in the best way possible? Because if we're not doing that, we are going to see the giant swings in open enrollment, and we'll see the instability in staffing. And so I understand when Don Calajan was dropping, they really needed to, first they wanted to become a true K-8, but then that situation led to a very small middle school, and they needed to attract kids back to their middle school so that they could be a viable school. So as we are making these decisions, we are now have more middle schools to deal with in the same number of students. And so that's just something it's there in elementary, but it's a little more stark when you go from 3 middle schools up to 5 with the same number of students. Mr. Shield wants to say something so badly.
No, I would say you're spot on with what your analysis. I would take the analysis one step further and say you also have to look at the elementary students that are coming in behind, and knowing that those elementary cohorts are smaller than the middle school cohorts we have today. So while we have roughly the same as the data that you showed, that's going to quickly decline as those elementary populations start moving into middle school.
And what we saw was with the decline in, can I finish this? With the decline in the number of students, we also had a decline in what programs we could offer. Because in order to offer enough, the variety of math, the language, the other options, you have to have enough students to take those courses. And as one of our middle schools got too small, we had to figure out how to beef it up so that those students could have similar options to our larger middle schools. And so that's something I think we need to keep in mind as we're in this open enrollment discussion, is that especially when you move up into middle and high school, if the schools get too small, the kids have fewer options. Am I right, Greg? Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will go for public comment now. Ms. Wysocki.
So I agree with what Trustee Fairchild just said, except I would also say 5 schools with fewer students, because we do have declining enrollment and it is going to get worse. But another thing that hasn't really been brought up that I am concerned about is that I think we're forgetting the fact that the students make the choices of classes they want to take. That drives the classes that are being offered. So while we say, oh, we can offer this class over there, that's not the system we have right now. It's driven by student choice. So the core classes are probably fine, but when you look at some of those elective classes, if you don't have enough students who ask for the class isn't going to be held. That's right, Greg? So that has been the system for a while. So it's great to talk about, let's do it this way. Well, our system isn't built that way. So if we're going to do that, we're talking about a revamp in a big way in our system.
Are there any comments in the Zoom?
We do. We have one commenter in the Zoom. So, Miss Raman from the SLI program, you will have 2 minutes to speak, and you should be able to speak now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
I am Miss Rahman or Sarah Rahman. Sorry, I'm too used to saying that. I'm the director of the SLI program. I just wanted to let you know that we have comprehensive data on SLI, including enrollment trends, admissions patterns, feeder schools, and student demographics when you need it. I am talking to Jennifer and Greg, and we can give you that whenever you need that. So if that's going to be discussed in the next meeting, I'll go ahead and collaborate with the principals. I also wanted to just kind of say that long-term, we'd love to expand SLI to other high schools and make sure that it's sustainable for all students. That means, that we have to figure out the right balance of resources, staffing, program structure, and funding. But that is the dream, is to expand SLI to other high school to increase access and ensure that more students across the district are benefiting from the program.
Thank you. If there are any other speakers, any other people that wish to speak, you can raise your hand with the Zoom tool. Otherwise, we will close the public comment from the Zoom at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Meltzer. Okay, we'll move on now to high school.
Okay, and then here are our demographic trends for high school. And then here are our programs. Again, so this is grades 9 through 12. All right, and then these will be our comprehensive high schools. The next presentation, I do include data, similar data on New Valley, Community Day, MEX, but for tonight, it is just going to be Santa Clara High, Wilcox, and Kathleen McDonald. Okay, and so here we have Santa Clara, School of Residence count, 1,474. And then the schools of the students who are deciding not to attend that school, but to open enroll into a different school. You can see where they are going, primarily to Wilcox, followed by MEX, and some at New Valley. And I will say that some of these are administrative placements. So, into other schools like New Valley or even Wilson. So it does include some of those. Like I said, I will disaggregate the information. They're not huge numbers in the grand scheme of things, but I will provide you with a better look. But of the ones who are leaving Santa Clara, or who are at least not attending their school of residence, the demographics are at the top, and then the ones who are coming in, the demographics are on the bottom. And of course, when we talk about the SLI program, that will be called out in these numbers as well. Demographics before and after. And then here's Wilcox. gain and loss are kind of canceling each other out. But the demographics are there. Here are the school demographics, school of residence versus current enrollment. So a little more insulated there, I'd say. And then finally, McDonald.
Do we still have kids that, how did this work? When McDonald opened, we let them stay, right? If they were boundaried for McDonald, but they stayed at whatever school, Santa Clara, Wilcox. Yeah, so are those going to count into those numbers?
Yeah, those are accounted for, but now we don't have any more grandfathering because McDonald has all grade levels. And so now, moving forward, all of the students would have to apply through the open enrollment.
About sibling preference, does that exist for
They,
that school?
they have sibling preference if their sibling will be attending that high school for the subsequent school year.
No, in other words, a student that's at Santa Clara, older brother is just about to leave, the new freshman comes in, would they be able to stay at Santa Clara because their older brother or sister or whatever?
If their older brother or sister are not going to be there the following year, no, they would not have.
If they were a junior, they could though.
Correct, yes, they could.
Okay, thank you. And then once they're in, they're permanently in.
Correct, through 12th grade.
And if a sibling got into like the SLI program, then that would give a younger sibling preference to get into Santa Clara?
The SLI program does not go through our open enrollment lottery. The SLI program is an application and interview.
No, my question was if you have an older child who got into the SLI program and is at Santa Clara, but you have a younger child who didn't want to do SLI, but you want to keep your two kids together,
Oh.
they get sibling priority?
Yes, in the lottery, if that sibling is going to be at Santa Clara.
They
Yes.
would do the open enrollment, but they'd have
They
the
have to
sibling.
do the open enrollment, yes.
Yeah.
Who decides who gets into the SLI program?
I'll let Dr. Kniep.
So SLI has their own panel, including some of the teachers. And I think probably the two principals might also have insight to that. But generally, they have their own process for turning in the applications, and then they do interviews.
So we have very little control over admissions, or we have some control? We have.
I would say most likely very little.
So it's a choice program that we offer, but we don't really control admission.
At the district level, we do not control admission. I believe that there are our employees, the teachers in the program that also are on the panel, interview panels.
Mm-hmm.
So some of our employees are on that, but not from the district level, not through open enrollment, none of our processes. And the same goes for MEX. So we don't have anyone from the district office sitting in on those interviews either.
So both of those choice programs require an interview. Do we control for inherent bias on those interview panels?
I don't have that information. What I will tell you is that through both programs, especially Mission Early College High School that I know of, and also Sarah Rahman has shared this, that they really try to make sure that they are diversifying their student body as they go. And I know, having seen more recent demographics from Mission Early College, they really have since the beginning. So there is an attempt to do that.
Okay. One one of the things that I would like us to see for the next meeting is information on how students are selected in the SLI process. Max is a little more difficult because it's Mission College and the kids are taking college courses. So I understand that that's a little more difficult for us to control. But on the SLI program, I'd like to understand better how that process works, how much input we have since it's got, it's a Santa Clara Unified program. I would hope we had some input on admissions. And so I'd like to get information about that. Thank you.
Just to clarify.
Yeah, you can have Ms. Rahman speak if she's speaking to my question.
To your question, yes. Ms. Rahman, if you'd like to answer the application process, please feel free to do so.
Sure. So I guess this is a longer discussion, but I do want to quickly talk about our admissions process. So we have a structured application and admissions process. We are looking for students that are a good fit for the program. So there is a holistic approach to it. And I recognize that any application-based process can carry inherent bias. So we're intentional about continuously, first of all, reviewing and improving how we identify and support students. We make sure that there are more than 3 staff members that are scoring our students to make sure that we count for that bias. There's multiple measures, right? We don't rely on one single metric. We look at multiple indicators such as interest, effort, teacher input, interviews, as well as academics to make sure that we build a more complete picture of each student. Again, the holistic approach is recognizing that potentially we might not see the traditional academic metrics as a way to understand who the student is. So we are aware of information gaps, right? So what we try to do is understand the student from a teacher point of view, as well as through the essay process to understand them from the family point of view. Again, we are actively working to reduce the barriers every year by making sure that the application process is done by different members of the team. If we're going to be talking about this next time, I can give you a more complete picture of every step of the way because we have a lot of that information. I did talk to Dr. Wright a couple of days ago on how we do all of the just choosing of the students. And it's nuanced, but it's also very objective. So I would love to give you more information later on if that's possible.
Thank you. We will work with you on that. Thank you very much.
Can I also clarify, you talked about MEX being similar. And I wasn't sure if you thought that the community college helps pick the students, because my understanding is it's our staff that.
Well, no, I just meant that they have to have kind of their own selection process because it's like.
I think it's pretty similar, how she was saying that they want to make sure the students are a good fit for the program. I think MEX does the same thing.
Right, but that's at a different site. That's like at Mission. This is at our school. This is at Cabrillo. This is.
Yeah, but there are students. I'm not sure
right,
the point.
But I wanted, like, these are kids that are in Max, but they're going to school at Mission College, right? So they're.
For part of their day, yeah.
Right. So I want to know, we have this program at Cabrillo, or not at Cabrillo, Yeah, Cabrillo. And I want to understand how they get into that program because they're they're co-located at Cabrillo, at one of our schools. Their MEX spends part of their day at Mission. Well, yeah, so I'm trying to understand why we don't have why this process is so different at Cabrillo when they're Cabrillo students going to school at Cabrillo.
Why is it different than the other kids at Cabrillo, or why is it different from MEX?
I'm not talking about MEX was just because they also have a separate admission process.
Mhm.
I want to understand why why we don't have the same control over the open enrollment process to the SLI program as we do to Washington Open or Millikan. If it's at Cabrillo and they're Cabrillo students, why don't we have more control over what students get into that program? We have control over who goes to who goes to
It's a
Washington
lottery.
Open.
It's a lottery. So
Right.
You think SLI should be a lottery?
No, I'm not. No, I'm trying. No,
I'm
I'm
trying
not
to
saying it
understand what
needs to
you're-
be a lottery. I'm saying why, if it's our program, if it's Santa Clara Unified's program, why don't we have more input into what students get to go to that specialized program?
But can I just
saying
also
we
say,
need more control.
sorry, can I just also
Go
say,
ahead, Michelle.
I'm not sure why it couldn't be a lottery for the SLI program. I know it hasn't been, but I'm not sure why it couldn't be. If students are interested and want to apply.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying, Michelle.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
understand why we as a district don't have that same level of control over what students get into that program. If it's an open enrollment program and we administer the open enrollment program, why don't we have we don't seem to have much input into which of our students go to that program. And
by-
that seems odd to me.
By we, you mean the board, the district office, our staff as a whole? Because our staff is picking those kids.
No, they're not.
I would say that we have the same amount of influence with MEX and SLI for the kids that get in as far as district level input. So it is, but both of them, the staff at MEX, which are our staff, and the staff at Cabrillo are involved in it. So it's the teachers, it's just not anyone from here.
With SLI, there's three entities. So you have the 49ers Foundation, you have the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, and then you have a couple of staff members. So there's three entities involved in it. But I do understand what President Lieberman is saying is that here's our program on our campus servicing our students, yet we have minimal say in who's accessing that program.
But is that a funding? Those entities are the funders, but the actual picking the kids, my understanding was it was our staff
No,
on that panel picking the kids.
they're on the panel, but they're a voice on a panel. There's two other entities that also have a say in who enters that program.
But the teachers are heavily involved in the process from Cabrillo.
I think the point was, we need to know more.
Yes. Trustee Ryan?
Yeah, I wanted to just weigh in a little bit on this, that I do see there's a little bit of difference. I understand with MEX, it's a high school program. They do need to ensure that the students are ready to be able to take college level work. I do see there's an additional, like, you want to, meet with those students, make sure they understand what they're getting into, and understand the college expectations and all of that. But I think the idea of bringing students in 7th grade to an SLI program to help develop their interest and passion and skills in STEM, and I will say at the very beginning of this program, the foundation, the 49ers Foundation, or through the 49ers, put some criteria in there that I don't think were the best for our students. They put in a math level that students had to achieve, and that's gone away with the change in our math pathways. But for me, you have students applying in 6th grade. This should be an opportunity for any student who's interested in. I mean, I've already said I would like to see us bring this, and I appreciate the teacher, director say of the program talking about how they also would love to bring this to every school in our district. But until we can get to that point, I think if a student has demonstrated interest, expressed interest, we should be able to take those students and help them build that interest and build those skills, whatever it might be, and not rely on a process that 11-year-olds are going through to be selected for a program that goes through their senior year in high school. So I actually think we could make that a lottery, and we might be amazed at the students. That we probably wouldn't lose anything in terms of achievement and success in that program. And it takes out any kind of unintentional even bias in or different readiness among students by interviewing them in a 6th grade. So I actually think we could turn that program, students apply, and then it's a lottery. I think we would have just as much success as we do now. Not that the panel isn't doing a great job, but I think that program can help transform any student who's interested.
Just a note on timekeeping. This is hard to really time because not any one person's talking. One board member starts, another one jumps in, then another one jumps in, then there's answers, and then we know time during answers, and then I have 3 or 4 board members simultaneously talking all at the same time. And so it's hard to segregate 2-minute pieces to everybody when everyone joins in mass in a back and forth. So do I have direction from our president on how to proceed?
Yeah. If, just try to keep up. Go ahead, Andy.
So I do want to see us take a look at I think the process may be working really well at Next, but I would like to see that. That program originally started as an actual program within Santa Clara High School that later converted into its own ELA. Originally, Jennifer Jolliffe and Sarah Smith would make that determination if it fit. They were actually using the program for students that were having a little more challenge socially, emotionally, fitting into the traditional high school environment. It was not considered to be initially an accelerated program for extra college credit. It became more of that as it evolved with time. But I'd like to maybe take a look at that and see, what has it become and what is the process we're using for choosing the students, just like you do with the SLI program. The other thing that I wasn't going to mention, but I decided to go ahead and spit in the wind. There is part of our problem that we're having is declining enrollment. Declining enrollment means the class sizes are getting smaller, the options are getting fewer because we have fewer students in the schools. One of the solutions to that is you close some schools. Okay, this is a terrible process, and I think it's one you don't want to get into lightly. In 1982, we closed Cabrillo. 10 years later, we had to reopen it because we had not done it. So I think anytime you talk about that, it has to be something that you do with a great deal of forbearance and concern about whether that's the right move, because you may find yourself reversing that very quickly. It was only 10 years later they had to reopen it. But it is something that we should look at on a long lens to look at that over a period of time, because that may be something that we have to confront down the road. How many enemies I just made.
I just wanted to do a time check.
Daniel, if you can just pull up the slide deck one more time. I think we only have one more slide. Almost done. Okay, and this is the last one. So these are the demographics of McDonald's population, school of residence in orange, and then their current enrollment in green. And so for this one, definitely I would say look at the N size, not so much the percentages. and that is, and then it is the discussion, which I believe we just.
Discussion, and then the last slide is about next steps. So do you want to forward it to vote now? So we've identified a lot of additional information that would be helpful for the next meeting. And then and then we wanted to figure out a timeline for the next discussion. So do you want to?
Yeah, and I think I will punt and do that this week. I can send out a doodle to our board members because I know our schedules were tight in scheduling this one and some of the other special board meetings that we had. But if you can please review your calendars and make some time, we would like to do the second meeting sometime in mid to late April. That'll give us some time to put some data together. They're looking at me like, that's not enough time, Damon. But we do have a couple other meetings, but we want to probably, I'll lean towards the end of April because I know we have strategic planning happening in May. Maybe it's the middle of May, but we'll look at some times in calendar and opportunity for us to sit down and talk about the choice program and also wrap up some of the questions that you brought forward with this open enrollment discussion as well.
Trustee Fairchild?
So one of the concerns that I'm going to echo again is just looking at our enrollment data is we now, from the beginning of the trend, the data set to now we have an additional comprehensive high school. And when we first started talking about the comprehensive high school to what the comprehensive high school became are very different things. I know there was supposed to be an emphasis on more career tech. And I feel that if we talk about, well, how can we get more students? How can we, if we were to create some sort of, or look at, just start exploring some sort of county, a program that could draw from county students, we may be able to help some of these numbers. The evolution of of the school and watching it change. I mean, there are facilities on that school that were designed for more of a career tech type of an experience that we could have provided. And so it just seems to me when we talk about how can we attract students, that is one of the ways that we could do that. That was kind of a missed opportunity because I worry again with smaller enrollment or fewer opportunities, especially at the secondary level. So if there's any way we can increase that the numbers of students, that would be great because we want our students to have a full a buffet of opportunities that they can choose from.
Trustee Muirhead?
Dr. Wright, in terms of the next meeting and next steps, I think definitely some people in the public were not quite clear about what the purpose of this meeting was, that we just wanted to go through the data and have discussions about it and no action being taken. How do you see the next meeting or set of meetings flowing? What do you see the timeline and where would we start making decisions?
I would think that based upon some of the requests that we have today and the requests that we received prior to this meeting, we'll give you an idea as to why we had to split these meetings up. We didn't have enough time to pull all the data or review all the data in one setting. As I think about as we transition to the choice program discussion, we're going to have a whole nother data set that's going to be pretty robust. In addition to some of the additional requests that we received today. So I would imagine that our next conversation would be an opportunity for us to share some of the data as we did today as to why we're having the conversation. Give us an idea to have some opportunity to have some discussion. And then as we roll into the fall, relaunch this discussion and probably start moving towards direction and decision, because we would definitely want to have some sort of direction by November at the latest, because we want to have a sound understanding of where we're going before the open enrollment process starts in January. And then we also have to factor in that we're here today too because of our boundary committee. Our boundary committee is at a standstill. I know that they believe there was a couple of meetings last year, correct me if I'm wrong, but they can't really move forward until we decide if we need to make some changes to our open enrollment practices and policies. Because if the boundary committee were to meet now, make some decision, redraw boundary lines, or make some decisions for school closures, and then we change our open enrollment policy, it undoes all that work that they did. So this is step one, and we have to give our boundary committee an opportunity to sit and have a meaningful discussion about our boundaries or some potential options of school consolidations, and I hope we don't need to go there. But I think we talked about that we have some really small schools and we have to have a responsible discussion about it. Hoping that we don't need to go there, but we do need to discuss that. So we would like to have some direction by November, so we'll backwards map from November. So I would say that if we're able to meet late April, sometime mid-May, that would be great. And then we'll launch early fall, and I think we'll start looking towards decision probably September, October, no later than November.
Thanks. Any other questions from trustee? Oh, that's right, I forgot. Sorry. Trustee Ryder. And you're sitting right next to me.
Yeah, I'll put the mic on now that I've done that. So I like some of that timing. I do want to make one comment. We're in the process of doing a strategic plan. It may or may not affect the outcome of this discussion that we're having now. So and I think what you just said actually fits, but having the next meeting not be a decision-making meeting, another informational meeting where we pick up the choice schools. And then we'll work on the strategic planning so that we get that nailed down. Then after that happens, and hopefully that will be done in time to be able to do your fall discussion about this. But I would hate to have us not do the strategic planning first and then have to change this at the last minute. I think that would be bad planning. So that was my one of my comments. The other little one is a technicality, but you mentioned that the boundary committee making decisions, and I believe they would make decisions about recommendations.
Recommendations.
Just want to be sure that it's really clear that that would be a recommendation to the board. Thank you.
In the strategic planning, I believe that we're on schedule to, we have another board meeting, I believe, scheduled in May. So I think that we would have an opportunity to tie up the strategic planning process before we relaunch this conversation.
Tough board. With that, cross your fingers, it's a tough board.
Okay. All right. Trustees Fairchild. I'm so used to you being on the Zoom. Trustee Watanabe and Trustee Ryan, do you have any other, do you have any questions about the process going forward? Otherwise, we'll.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm
Trustee
fine
Rao.
as well. I just appreciate all the discussion and just been making a lot of notes and look forward to the continuation of the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Trustee Waterman.
Now I'll make a motion to adjourn with my phone on. Mic on.
Trustee Canova,
Yes.
Trustee Fairchild,
Yes.
Trustee Muirhead,
Yes.
Trustee Waterman,
Yes.
Trustee Ryan,
Yes.
Trustee Watanabe,
Yes.
and I vote yes. We are adjourned at 10:15.